Okay, we are now at quorum, so we would like to get started. For the record, the time is now 1:03 p.m., and we have begun the Assembly Bill 32 Environmental Justice Advisory Committee public meeting. Welcome, everyone. My name is Jane Harrington from Leading Resources, and I'm the facilitator for today's meeting. I'm happy to be here with you all today. To get started, I'll cover some housekeeping and logistics. Spanish interpretation will be provided in the Zoom Spanish channel for the duration of the meeting. We have 2 interpreters with us today for that. For those here in the building, restrooms are outside the door to the left and down the hall by the drinking fountains. And in case of an emergency, please exit out the door and to the right down the stairs. We will have public comment periods today. For members of the public participating remotely, you will be able to raise your hand in Zoom to speak. When it's your turn, the host will ask you to unmute, and after you click on the unmute button from your end, you may begin to speak. We appreciate you staying on mute until it is your turn to speak. In the event that *6 does not work to unmute you, CARB can unmute you. We will be switching off between commenters in the room and those on Zoom. For all public commenters, a few requests and reminders. Before providing your question or comment, please state your name and affiliation, if applicable, so that we know who is speaking. We will do our best to do the same in the room for members of the public to know who's talking. Please limit your comments to that specific agenda item. We intend to give each commenter 3 minutes to speak, and we'll let you know if any changes are required based on the volume of comments we're expecting. And while EJAC welcomes your comments, committee members will not be responding to public comment. Zoom Q&A and chat functions are turned off for participants. Now I'd like to introduce our Spanish interpreter that is on the line in the main channel. Carlos, if you could please introduce yourself and translate the information on this slide.
Gladly, muy buenas tardes. Su servidor, Carlos, parte del equipo de interpretación. Si nos acompaña vía Zoom, para hacer comentarios en su momento, necesita levantar su mano virtual. Si nos acompaña vía telefónica en Zoom, levantaría para marcar su mano el número 2. Cuando sea su turno, se le informará utilizando los últimos dígitos del teléfono o en su nombre, que será su turno, y entonces podrá abrir su micrófono utilizando *6 o activando el micrófono en Zoom. Les agradecemos de antemano que mantengan el micrófono silenciado durante el resto de la reunión. Las funciones de preguntas y de chat están deshabilitadas para esta sesión. Thank you.
Thank you. For those who are participating in person, to prevent echoes, we request that you do not join the Zoom audio. So you click on the symbol next to the unmute button as seen as number 1. Next, if you have joined the computer audio, please leave computer audio as seen in number 2. Also, please make sure to stay muted for the full duration of the meeting and with your volume down. Carlos, can you please provide the translated information on this slide?
Para evitar ecos cuando esté en la reunión, al ingresar a la reunión no ingrese con el audio de la computadora. En caso de que ya lo haya hecho, en el menú de su micrófono, como ve en pantalla, en la flechita que va hacia arriba, puede seleccionar, va a aparecer una nueva ventana y en esta nueva ventana puede abandonar el audio de la computadora. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we will provide instructions and then we will enable the Zoom interpretation features. When the interpretation globe appears at the bottom right corner of Zoom, as seen in item number 1, please choose your preferred language as English or Spanish, as seen in number 2. Carlos, please provide these instructions.
Después de este anuncio, aparecerá en su barra de controles de Zoom, en la parte inferior derecha, un icono de interpretación, parece un globo terráqueo. Simplemente le da clic y selecciona su idioma de preferencia, sea inglés o español. Si no le aparece el icono por algún motivo, seleccione los puntos suspensivos o más, luego interpretación de idiomas, y de ahí podrá seleccionar español. Back to you, thank you.
Thank you. If for any reason you should require technical Zoom support today, please contact CARB staff Christabel, who's in person here, and her email is provided on this slide. We will do our best to assist you. Today's meeting is being recorded. CARB staff will post to the EJAC Meetings and Events website that recording in coming weeks. This is the same website where you can find all materials for today's meeting as provided on this slide. Carlos, could you please provide these instructions in Spanish?
En caso de cualquier problema técnico durante la sesión de hoy, favor de comunicarse con Cristabel Ucomandú por correo electrónico, como aparece en pantalla, y les recordamos que esta reunión se está grabando y todos los materiales de la reunión, entre ellos esta grabación, estarán disponibles en el portal del Comité Asesor de Justicia Ambiental de la Junta de Recursos Atmosféricos del Estado de California, como aparece ahora en pantalla del lado derecho, y la grabación estará disponible en dicho sitio en aproximadamente 2 semanas después de la reunión. Thank you.
Thank you. With that, I would like to begin the EJAC member roll call. As a reminder, this is the formal record of meeting attendance, and therefore we ask that all EJAC members respond when your name is called. Please state here your affiliation, pronouns, and if you are on or off camera, and if off, the reason for doing so consistent with our meeting requirements. For EJAC members who join the meeting later, we will be asking for them to verbally announce their attendance in the same fashion so it is clear to all participants who is in the room with us. So to begin, Martha Dina Arguello.
Martha Dina Arguello, Physicians for Social Responsibility, Los Angeles, she, her pronouns.
Thank you. Juan Flores. Dr. Catherine Garupa.
Catherine Garupa here in the room, they and she pronouns with the Central Valley Air Quality Coalition.
Thank you. Kevin Hamilton. John Harriel Jr. Thomas Helm.
Hello, Tom Helm, co-founder Valley Improvement Projects, he, him, his, virtually on camera.
Thank you. Matt Holmes.
Hi, Matt Holmes, California Environmental Justice Coalition, attending remotely off camera right up until I find a second power outlet in this hotel room that is operational.
Understood. Thank you. John Kevin Jefferson III. Ray Leone. Luis Almedo. Jill Sherman Warren.
Present. I will be on camera. I might, if I'm eating, so I might go off camera if my mouth gets too full.
Understood.
Starving.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. All right. I will now turn it over to our co-chairs to go over today's agenda.
Good afternoon and welcome again, everyone. This is Dr. Catherine. We've covered housekeeping and logistics in the roll call, so we'll start with introductions and opening remarks after this overview. Then we will hear an item on the March 13th, 2025 EJAC public meeting minutes. We'll take public comment on that item. Item 6 will entertain a motion to approve the March 13th minutes. Item number 7 is a guest speaker presentation on building decarbonization. We will take a break as needed and as time allows. Then item 8, I will provide an overview and then we will have a guest speaker on cap and trade and affordability. Item 9 will be public comment on those items. 10 is CARB announcements, and then we'll end with next steps and closing remarks.
Thank you. I'll invite the co-chairs to also share with us the EJAC meeting agreements.
Sure, I can do that. So we have a packed agenda, so we want to make sure that folks are paying attention to equity of airtime, be present, be flexible, be realistic, and monitor our ability to get through the full agenda, seek out synergies in our work, yes, and building on each other's work, if virtual, Keep your cameras on throughout the duration of the meeting. I'm also trying to sneak my lunch, so I might also do what Jill's doing. State if you're off camera because it's important for us to maintain quorum. If you're leaving the meeting, notify staff or co-chairs. Listen and be compassionate and supportive of each other. Reach for and invite inspiration and intuition. Look for ways to move toward action when possible. Respect the agenda and trust the process. And we all share responsibility for the success of the EJAC.
Thank you. Mhm. We will now move to agenda item number 3, introductions and opening remarks. And I will turn it over to Chanel Fletcher, CARB's Deputy Executive Officer. Chanel?
Thank you so much, Jane. I just want to welcome everybody. I also want to thank everyone for listening in and engaging in the EJAC public process. I do want to thank all of the CARB deputies, as well as the chair's office and board members who are here with us today, whether you are online or in the room. I know that Catherine kind of already went through, I think, the main topics that we have today. So I just wanted to make sure that I followed up on a couple of items that came up from our April EJAC meeting. One of the things that we did talk about that last meeting was the zero emission space and water heater standards. And there were a few questions that came up from the EJAC as a part of that discussion. So we did send over a document with responses to those questions and answers to the EJAC members on May 4th. I think it was either May 14th or May 15th, maybe today. And I believe we've also posted that as well. So want to give folks an opportunity to look over those questions and answers, and then let us know if there's any additional follow-up on that front. We also talked about natural and working lands presentation and discussion that was led by Matt. And so to my understanding, the subgroup will be meeting over the next few weeks to discuss next steps. And then I think we are looking to help to schedule a meeting to make sure that we have a better understanding and I think giving a better overview of where we're at on natural and working lands. And then I think one of the other things that we've discussed was a 2025 calendar for the EJAC. And so we are having further discussions with the co-chairs and working to incorporate their feedback. And so we do hope to have a revised kind of a calendar ready for the EJAC members to reflect all the items that the EJAC plans to focus on leading up to the joint CARB EJAC board meeting in September. Finally, I'll just note that we're kind of working very proactively to process and make sure that we send the EJAC members their TEC documentation. I just want to say a huge thank you for working with our team to get your travel receipts into us. And as soon as we get your receipts, we're able to process and move forward. And again, if there's any issues that come up, please let us know because we want to make sure that we get that timely payment out to all of you. So with those things said, I will turn it back over to the EJAC co-chairs.
Thank you. And this is the facilitator, Jane Harrington. I'm going to pause before I turn it over to the co-chairs. We do have another EJAC committee member with us. Luis, I'll invite you to state your presence and your pronouns and your association, if you'd like.
Go ahead, Catherine.
Yeah. Hello, good afternoon, everyone, members of the committee. I am Luis Olmedo, the Executive Director of Comité Cívico del Valle. And I did put on the chat, I will have some connection limitations. So for the duration of the meeting, I will likely be off camera. Thank you.
Thank you, Luis. Good to have you. All right. I will turn it over to our co-chairs.
Thanks for that invitation, Martha Dina. This is Dr. Catherine. I'll go ahead and start us off with opening remarks and then pass it to you. I do want to acknowledge that yesterday the governor announced his proposed May revise for his budget, which has serious implications for the work that we do related to climate programs. I am personally still digesting and talking with colleagues about what it means, but do want to acknowledge that it skips over necessary reforms for the cap and trade program. And so that's definitely of concern and something that we'll want to monitor. At the same time, I think it points to the fact that the work that we do as EJAC to refine and elevate environmental justice priorities remains essential. And obviously cap and trade is one of our agenda items today. So I'm looking forward to some robust presentations and discussion there and still hold out hope for meaningful integration of our priorities. With that, over to you, Martha Dina.
Don't have much more to add, but then I think over the years, the one thing I've learned is that often the Environmental Justice Advisory Committee is like the canary in the coal mine, warning of things of course corrections that are incredibly necessary. And I think mirroring what Catherine just said, I think right now, particularly with the building decarb work and other work, we have an opportunity to do things differently and to make sure that the benefits get to the most vulnerable and the people who need the most and need that support the most. And so in that spirit, I hope we can continue to engage with CARB to address the long-term issues about real emissions reductions, addressing air pollution, and getting us on a course to a real transition away from fossil fuels. And so we'll continue to do that. And I'm looking forward to the work of our committee. And I'll stop talking.
Thank you. We'll now move to agenda item number 4, which is the March 13th, 2025 EJAC public meeting minutes. We are now posting these on the CARB EJAC website. We'd like to review and adopt the minutes from that meeting. Is there any discussion from the committee on those minutes? Hearing and seeing none in the room, looking virtually. Hearing none.
Go
ahead.
I've read them briefly, and my computer's having a hard time multitasking, so I can't actually pull them up in the moment. So I'm not looking at them.
Okay. All right. Hearing no other discussion, we'll go ahead. Oh, Luis, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Thank you. Good afternoon again. So I just want to be clear that I'm appropriately addressing this agenda item. This is the point where we're open to general comments.
For the March meeting minutes, yeah, this is an opportunity for discussion from the committee.
Oh, it's specifically for the March minutes?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, no, I will hold off.
Okay.
General comment.
Great. Thank you. All right. Hearing no other discussion from the committee on this specific agenda item, we will now take public comment on this specific agenda item. We ask that everyone who is interested in speaking in Zoom, please raise your hands. We'll call on you in the order they were raised. We will allow 3 minutes for each commenter. Please state your name and affiliation before you provide your comment. And seeing no in-person commenters, I will go ahead and turn to Zoom. Jeff, I see your hand raised. Do you want to go ahead? Jeff, I believe you're unmuted on our end. You might need to unmute on yours. We can't hear you yet. All right. Jeff, I'll give you a moment. We'll see if we can help you with that. I do see another virtual hand raised. Elizabeth Bourne, would you like to go ahead?
Oh, hi. Yes. I'm speaking as an individual today, and I was just reviewing the public comments, and I had some concerns about what's happening right now when you give your names and you go through this pronoun ritual where you ask each person to announce pronouns. I think you might have heard the Department of Transportation Secretary Duffy just last week said he's not going to be funding some of the transportation projects at San Jose State University or UC Davis because of the promotion of gender ideology and the indoctrination So my concern right now, as I look through the minutes, is that it seems that this group, EJAC, is trying to push this idea that humans can be born in the wrong body, and that when you give your pronouns, you're telling everyone how you want them to speak to you. So compelled speech. The majority of Americans don't believe in the idea that your body could ever be wrong. There's no wrong or right way to be a man or a woman. And just reading through the public comments and you know, your minutes from the last meeting, it just really seems like this group is trying to live in this, I don't know if you want to call it a make-believe world, where transportation isn't related to someone's human sex, right? And so this means that women who use transit, who use BART, who use Uber, Lyft, you know, walk on the sidewalks, ride their bikes, women, which can only be a human female with XY chromosomes, we are being hurt the most. And by EJAC not believing in human reality and biological sex, your
This is
whole
hate speech. You need to discontinue this.
I'm sorry, I have public comments. Excuse me. I'm
Please.
not done yet.
Yeah,
This is not hate speech. This is what most Americans believe. So I'm sorry if Matt doesn't believe that women have the right to speak, but I have 3 minutes, and I will tell you, Matt, that you will never be a woman. You cannot identify into womanhood, and that for you as a committee member to believe that I don't have the right to say what most Americans believe, you know, you're violating my free speech and my First Amendment rights, and it is not hate speech. And you are actually hurting women, Hispanic women, Black women, Asian women, women who are the most vulnerable on the streets and using public transportation, because you are a big, white, fat American white male. And I think you have the hate speech, Matt. Thank you.
I'm sorry.
So
You
that
need to
concludes
promise
public
me to be
comment.
stopped.
That concludes public comment on
No
this.
need to respond.
Yeah, we will, looking virtually, seeing another hand raised, looking in the room, seeing no one making public comment in the room. Jeff, we will go back to you. Let's see if we can get you off mute.
Can you hear me now?
We can, thank you.
My apologies. I'm a little confused on the agenda. My name is Jeff Ellsworth. I'm the former mayor up in St. Helena, Napa County, and now a member of Cal LULAC. I wanted to make some comment on an issue regarding the air issues of a local landfill, but I'm realizing that the public comment, it may be specific only to these items and there's not a general public comment.
Thank you, Jeff. I can respond to that as a facilitator. This public comment period is dedicated to just the minutes, making sure that we stay on topic, but we do have a general public comment period at the end of the meeting. That would be an appropriate time to make comments on items that are not on today's agenda, if you'd like.
That's great. I will stick around till then. Thank you very much.
Thank you. At this time, we'll move to agenda item number 6, which is looking for a motion from the committee to approve the March 13th, 2025 EJAP public meeting minutes.
Make a motion to
I'll-
approve the March minutes.
I will second that. Jill Sherman Warren.
Thank you. So we've got a first from Thomas Helm, a second from Jill Sherman Warren. We will now take a vote on this item. Martha Dina Arguello,
Yes.
Juan Flores, Dr. Catherine Grupa,
Abstain because I was not present March 13th.
Kevin Hamilton, John Harrell Jr., Thomas Helm, Matt Holmes.
Abstain, uninterested.
Sorry, Tom, I skipped over you. Let me go back to you.
Yes.
John Kevin Jefferson III, Ray Leone, Luis Almedo.
Yes.
Thank you. Jill Sherman Warren. Jill, can I get a verbal?
Yes, sorry.
Thank you. Thank you. Good. That is 5 in favor, 1, 2 abstain. Motion passes. We will now move to agenda item number 7, the EJAC guest speaker presentation on building decarbonization. I'll have the co-chairs do an introduction for this item.
Oh, I think that's me.
Go ahead, Martha Dina.
Sorry, I'm having real bad connectivity and computer problems. That the present is, aren't we doing the building decarb presentation first?
Yeah, yes, it's just a technical glitch here for a second,
Okay,
and
great.
we're going to the beat slides.
So our next presenters will be talking about the work that the Building Energy and Equity and Power Coalition have been doing, and the collaboration with the with CARB around shaping the building decarbonization work and the appliance standards. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Katie and Edgar to begin this presentation.
Hi, everyone. My name is Katie Valenzuela. I'm with the Central Valley Air Quality Coalition and facilitate the BEEP Coalition proudly. I think we can pass it around to do intros and maybe end with Chris, who's going to start us on our slides. So I'll pass it to Edgar.
Hello, everyone. My name is Edgar Barraza. I use he, him, his pronouns, and I'm with Physicians for Social Responsibility, Los Angeles. And I lead our statewide building decarbonization work. I'm going to go ahead and pass it off to my colleague, Megan.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Megan Leary. I am the Community Engagement and Policy Manager with Emerald Cities Collaborative Northern California, she, her pronouns. I have been engaged in the local Bay Area Air District work and that we are going to discuss in this. And I will pass to Chris. Sorry.
Hi, my name is Chris Seelig. I'm with Poder, which is an environmental economic justice organization based in San Francisco. And I'm the director of Healthy and Resilient Homes. So I'm going to start us off with the first few slides. So we're from Building Energy, Equity and Power, which is a coalition that is a California-wide coalition that represents environmental justice groups in Los Angeles, Bay Area, San Joaquin Valley. And our mission is to ensure low-income consumers and consumers of color benefit and are not adversely impacted by building decarbonization efforts. And you can see the list of our core organizations on the slide. Next slide. We've worked together, we formed and worked together to develop the energy justice principles that we're working with and that we've all agreed to. The first priority is keeping power on and keeping people housed. We're also committed to a just transition that will provide high road jobs and meet basic needs of workers. We see equitable policy means all ratepayers benefit. Energy is a public good. Understanding the urgency of public health and climate crisis, we must not rush to false solutions. Cost impacts must be analyzed at a more nuanced level. Solutions must not have aggressive impacts. There's no one size fits all or low-hanging fruit solution. Energy policy must be informed and led by community experts and community organizers who are paid to do that critical work. Make space for building allies and unity. No sacrifice zones, be intentional about benefits and burdens. The goal is resilient communities and energy systems. We're very interested in applying standards, but really want to work to make those, make them work well and be effective for everybody, including low-income communities. Okay, next slide.
And I think this is Edgar.
Yeah, passing to Edgar.
Yes. So the BEEP Coalition has been taking on several statewide initiatives, being informed by the local work. In the Central Valley, beat members are been implementing the San Joaquin Valley pilot projects and have lessons learned that they've been reporting out through some of the memos. In Los Angeles, San Francisco, and Hayward, we've been working on building performance standard. Um, uh, two of two members of the BEEP coalition, PSRLA, including Poder, are actually going to be one of the leading CBOs implementing the CEC's Equitable Building Decarbonization Program in the northern region of California and southern region of California. We've been working with the California Public Utilities Commission on developing listening sessions that would inform their overall work around building decarbonization. And we have folks here, part of the BEEP Coalition, also working on Bay Area's air quality management uh, appliance standards as well too. And we have quarterly and monthly calls with CARB staff and the CEC staff just to make sure that the work for overall building decarbonization is really centered in equity and community. Next slide, please. So from all the listening sessions and work and just the culmination of all the items we've been working on, we've learned a lot of lessons learned of how to move building decarbonization forward that's truly centered in equity and communities. We've learned that there are extensive barriers to building decarbonization, and a lot of these barriers are rooted in racist housing and zoning laws that have strategically placed Black and Brown communities in certain areas that are now facing and experiencing cumulative impacts of pollution. Well, we've also learned that our low-income communities are more heavily impacted by heavy utility bills. But we're also learning that to decarbonize homes, it's ineffective to do one appliance at a time. So there's a deep need to do holistic and whole home homes retrofits to maximize energy efficiency, but also increase living standards inside homes and address the long-standing habitability issues inside homes, such as the issues of lead paint and asbestos inside many of our low-income homes. We'll also understand that in order to decarbonize all of California, we need to have sustainable and flexible funding to not just only electrify the gas appliances to all electric, but to do the remediation to get low-income homes to be ready to electrify. So many homes don't have the proper infrastructure to be ready to electrify, and there needs to be funds that are able to do so. If there isn't, folks will be left behind in this transition as some homes need electrical panel upgrades or the service lines are not ready to enable electrification. So these are some really deep-rooted issues. We also understand that there's no one-size-fit-all model. The energy solutions that work in LA are not going to serve the communities in the Central Valley, and those solutions will not serve the folks in the Bay Area. We need to take a regional approach and really understand the key energy infrastructure barriers that will enable electrification. And lastly, we need to ensure that building decarbonization policies are really rooted in community. And to do so, we need to co-develop policies with communities, and that includes deep collaboration with community-based organizations who are trusted messengers, but who also are working with communities to educate them and inform them of how these policies impact their homes. As we talked about all these barriers, we understand that CARB doesn't have the legal regulatory power to address all these unintended consequences we just named. So there is a deep need for CARB to actually collaborate with the CEC on ensuring that there's sustainable funding. We need CARB to deeply coordinate with the CPUC to understand the issues with the grid capacity. And we also need to figure out how CARB can work with appropriate agencies to ensure that none of the communities are displaced by building decarbonization projects. So we also need to figure that out too, whether that's working with state housing department or figuring out legislation that ensures carbs building appliance standard doesn't further create harm on vulnerable communities already. I can go ahead and pass it to my colleague Megan for the next slide.
Yes, thank you. So like Edgar mentioned, we have, from our work and our various involvement in various initiatives, we have highlighted a couple key points of leverage and concern to CARB. Like Edgar just mentioned, one of the primary concerns that we've seen in our work is the lack of adequate electrical grid capacity for households to transition, particularly in rural areas. One of the things that we've witnessed in our work is that multiple interventions of electrification are more efficient to do at one time, meaning multiple appliance installs, additional remediations and renovations. And if that is done on a wider scale, even over a longer period of time, it may lead to some grid capacity issues. Additionally, the cost of substantial upgrades to accommodate new appliance is really a primary concern for many of the vulnerable communities that we are working in. This goes beyond just the cost of the appliances themselves. It's also the cost of installation and the amount of time it might take to figure out these installations adds to the cost as well. We're also seen a lack of ability or time to obtain an appliance, make substantial upgrades, and particularly in emergency scenarios. Vulnerable communities, vulnerable community members such as seniors, folks with disabilities, medical baseline residents, they do have a much harder time accessing some of the programs that might be of use in this scenario, or at a baseline understanding how to go about doing an emergency replacement, and are not able to execute that on their own without assistance. We also are seeing the risk of higher energy bills play out in a lot of these decarbonization initiatives. Our work has really identified that electric rates in California are of concern, and that we are not seeing the bill savings consistently across regions that we would like to with some of these interventions. Another massive concern that we have seen is the risk of tenant evictions or renovictions. I don't know if anyone's heard that term, but we do see that a lot in some of that play out in a lot of electrification work, particularly in long-term residence and rent-controlled spaces, large multifamily units, et cetera. And we do not see that a statewide intervention being enacted to kind of combat that risk. As you can see, a lot of these concerns that we have raised deal with cost, affordability, installation of the appliances themselves, but also remediation. And many of these impacts that we've seen in our work really sit at the intersection of a lack of building readiness and a lack of community readiness, meaning the ability to deal with the bill impacts, understanding of how to get the installations done, lack of contractor availability, things of that nature. Next slide, please. So in our work, and the second thing we've seen in response to some of these concerns is two primary approaches from other agencies. And those are proposing broad exemptions to things like appliance standards or code enforcement, et cetera, and a heavy, heavy focus on incentives. We do understand both of these and know where they're coming from, but we do feel that both of them can run the risk of leaving our communities that we work in behind, meaning leaving them on the gas system and without a way to remediate costs. So we feel that going forward, the implementation of some of these initiatives and standards really does require ancillary policies and programs to create a web that supports vulnerable communities in the electrification and decarbonization processes. When we say being left behind, exemptions, things of that nature pose a risk in some cases for safety concerns. We've put an example here. Reduced throughput on gas lines is a major concern for many of older houses that may be left behind as a result of exemptions. So things of that nature require a little more nuance and care as we move forward with implementation. Relying too heavily on both of these solutions, we do just run a risk. And so we want to highlight that here. And I will pass on. Next slide.
Well, thank you, team. So rounding out our short little presentation here for Q&A. Well, in the end, what we want, and in case you haven't heard, is we want all the gas appliances out of our communities' homes. And what we've been hearing in our listening sessions we're doing right now is, again, a commitment that people want these appliances out, but they have a lot of big concerns. So things that we've told CARB that we think should be pursued before there's an appliance standard rule. We really think there's an opportunity to sit down and suss out what we know and what we don't know. There's an ongoing research project at UC Berkeley that several of us are participating in, where we could really sit down and figure out where are the gaps, where are the best practices, and what are the problems that we still need to solve. We also think that we could do a more targeted ranking of communities. And by ranking, I mean more like looking at where are those high vulnerable communities where maybe the gas lines are already not safe, where they are already having high energy burden, high issues with pollution and extreme weather, and where there's opportunity, say there's a gas line replacement scheduled, right? And so we can go in and say, hey, rather than update that gas line, let's work on a targeted decarb pilot so we can get this community off gas. So we think there's an opportunity to dig more into the data. A lot of the data we see is really models. And I think a lot of what we've been seeing in homes as we do these pilots is a lot of unexpected little surprises that you wouldn't know unless you went into a community and really figured out what was going on. We think we need to quantify the necessary resources and necessary policies. To Edgar's point, we recognize not all of this is within CARB's jurisdiction. So how do we look at things like aligning the incentives that CPUC and the funding that CEC has for equitable decarb, and maybe some policy changes and maybe some air district resources to really make sure that we're all going in the same way? What would that roadmap look like? And finally, again, to Edgar's point, we really want to convene all of the stakeholders together. We think that this is going to require a broad multi-agency approach. This is going to probably require some legislative engagement. And so how do we get the key technical stakeholders together as well as the key community representatives together so we can workshop this and hopefully lead to successful decarbonization efforts across our state? So next slide, please. So as we referenced, we're currently doing a second round of listening sessions in partnership with the PUC. And so we would like to come back to you all later this fall once we finish that process so we can talk a little bit more about what we've been seeing. We're also in the process of standing up our local pilots. And so we're hoping to start having some good data and examples and progress updates that we can share with you. We would like to partner with CARB on convening this interagency discussion and maybe thinking through what that would need to look like and what resources might need to be available so that can be productive. And really, we want to keep working with CARB to design a successful standard. I think eventually there will need to be a standard in place to ensure that everybody is getting the cleanest appliances, but there's a lot of work that we need to do to get there, and our commitment is to keep working with CARB to get that done. So next slide is just for questions. So I'm happy to, our team can answer anything. And Megan is really deep in the Bay Area rule process, and Chris is deep in pilot implementation, and Edgar is deep in LA coalition work. So we've got all the experts on the call.
Thank you. We will open it up to discussion from the committee now, and I'll turn it over to Dr. Catherine.
Thank you so much to the BEEP team for coming and presenting. Really appreciate it, and for all of the thoughtful work that you're doing on what's clearly a very complex issue. Renovations is a new term, so I've definitely learned something today. And it also...
Renovictions.
Yeah. There you go. It's a new term that I've learned and will remember. And it also brought up for me that I recently learned that renters can be evicted for arrearages on their utility bills. And so hearing that sometimes decarbonizing can actually raise their bill initially just shows why this type of approach really needs to be tailored and thought out carefully in terms of the implications for environmental justice households. I think oftentimes in the regulatory processes that I've participated in, we hear a lot of conversations about the low-hanging fruit, and there's a tendency to go after what's easy first. when really what we need to do is foreground the communities where this is going to be the most challenging, because they're the ones that will benefit and need it and have been waiting the longest and need it the most. So again, really appreciate the work and the expertise that you all bring. And my overarching question is if you could all just speak a bit more on how receptive the various agencies you've been engaging with have been, including CARB, but obviously there are also other stakeholders involved.
Yeah, I'd love to hear from the crew, but I will say that we've gotten really robust engagement from all of the agencies, which has been really fantastic. The listening session we just did on Tuesday night was Fresno, Bakersfield, and virtual. I was holding down the Zoom room for the folks who couldn't get to either location in the San Joaquin Valley, and we had Commissioner McAllister on the whole time, Commissioner Hawk from CPUC the whole time. We had CARB staff in Bakersfield to participate and listen to the conversation. So folks have been really receptive to the feedback, and I hope it's because we've learned lessons from things like solar, where if we're not really intentional out the gate, then the incentives and the benefits tend to miss our communities in general. So we've enjoyed some pretty robust partnership and ongoing conversation, but I'm curious if any of my colleagues have anything else they want to add.
Yeah, I can go ahead and add. I think the engagement, the CEC staff who are working and oversee the Equitable Building Decarbonization Program, I appreciate their level of staff engagement and their form of community engagement as well too. I think they really set a really high bar of what it means to do community engagement and co-create programs. And particularly a funding program that is so robust as it is today. Um, uh, just implore other regulatory bodies to hold that as a standard of what it means to engage communities and co-develop policies and programs. So I really appreciate the CC. So folks from CC are here on this call, Commissioner McAllister, big kudos to you and your team. And we'll also appreciates CARB's team keeping quarterly monthly calls with the BEEP team too. I think developing those deep relationships and continue to work with each other on the details of policies and understanding the details of the unintended consequences is just opens the opportunity for deeper collaboration. So I really appreciate that. And I see my colleague Megan has something else to say.
Yeah, I just wanted to add, I second what Edgar said. I also wanted to add that the reception to and the feedback from our pilots, our various pilot initiatives, has been really, really good. And that agencies are very engaged with our results and kind of like Edgar said, listing out unintended consequences. We've gotten a lot of great engagement off the unintended consequences. So kudos to everyone, all the CARB, CEC, they have both been very interested in that aspect of the work. And I want to give kudos to that because that's sometimes the hardest to hear. So.
All right, we've got some other hands raised. I'll take them in order. It was Jill, Luis, and then Martha Dina.
Hi, thank you for your presentation. I thought it was very thoughtful and well put together. Gave me a lot of information to learn from. And I'm kind of curious, and maybe this isn't related at all. CARB has I don't know if you've heard of Calibrate California. But CARB had a response to the misinformation that they're putting out. And I thought it was interesting. I mean, it's not like a great response. It's kind of vague. You know, there's like this pride in that they have 500,000 homes that already have been, have electric, electric chargers at home, which represents less than 3% or about 3% of the entire homes in California, which isn't a huge number, right? Is there anything, I don't know who from CARB put that fact sheet together, but is there anything like that for this? Like, how do you get like, is CARB interested in doing a fact sheet to maybe dispute some of the claims that you were making? I'm just curious. I mean, I believe everything you're saying, but is it just Calibrate California? I mean, are they going to do that with BEEP? I don't know. I'm just curious as to who puts that together and how they decide who they put it together for? Thank you.
I mean, I definitely won't answer for car, but I will say in response to the calibrate, like I don't have an electric vehicle because I live in an apartment building and I can't access charging in my neighborhood, right? So there are real barriers in place for someone even like me who grew up in Oildale and wants to get off gas really, really badly. And I think the same holds true for building decarbonization. So our message with Marta Dina can echo pretty strongly, I'm sure, has always been that this is a threat to the overall goal. If we don't address these issues, then what industry does is they co-opt our very real concerns and use it to undermine climate policy when really what we're saying is we want to make it work. We don't want to not benefit. We actually want to solve the problem so we can proceed, and industry uses it to try to become a roadblock. So it's hard, but these are the sort of hard questions that I have to say I applaud CARB for being so willing to open the conversation up and to try to figure that out with us. And so this is hopefully going to run a little differently.
I appreciate that. I've been talking to a lot of electric vehicle owners, and I was taking pictures of the chargers and how much they're charging, and I couldn't figure out why some charge like literally I have a picture of a charging station charging $57 to charge a vehicle. Okay, you might as well buy gas at that point, right? Well, what I found out is, and I didn't know this, is that if you don't take your vehicle off the charger, it will just continue to charge you. And I don't know how many people know that, but it will just continue to charge you as you're sitting on the charger. And I don't think they advertise that. I think that's just something you have to figure out. And so when I'm thinking about, because my concern is rural areas and how are they going to actually come to this place of electrification in their vehicles. That, speaking to individuals who own electric vehicles in these rural areas, they say if they use their vehicle to drive to town, which is like 60 plus miles away, they have to have not only an idea of one place to charge. They have to have at least 4 places that they can charge, because they can't depend on the first choice. They have to go, first choice might be broken, might not be working, second choice same thing, third choice same thing, but 4. And that, for somebody who obviously is engaged in wanting to be electrified, the fact that our infrastructure isn't quite where we need to be is a real problem. And sometimes I think, people don't, again, because I'm a busybody and will talk to anybody. I'm just like, how's it going with your electric car? How are you feeling? Are your chargers always, there's a whole host of conversations that come back to, well, charging stations aren't always available, and sometimes the charging stations are broke, and I have 4 apps on my phone because there's all these different, like, we need to have a real conversation about that. And I really appreciate that you guys are doing that, and I again, I thank you and applaud you for lifting these issues up, and I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you. Luis, and then Martha Dina.
Yeah, thank you. That's a great presentation. The situation that we face and will only have an increase of facing is that there's these ambitious goals, long overdue, and there's a lot of attention, or there is some attention to rolling out these programs, but the policies do not facilitate the deployment to its intended purposes. And it reminds me of the chargers, EV chargers. There's mass deployment of EV chargers, but the agency's government itself is not coordinated. And be honest, I mean, sometimes I wonder whether we're dealing with people who don't want it to succeed, because I can't find any other reason why they would become an impediment and why they would not proactively, as agencies within their own authorities, try to solve some of these problems by picking up the phone and talking to each other. we're facing the same situation when it comes to decarbonization in the household, and with appliances. People at this very moment, they fear government. They don't think government is their friend. And so a lot of it has already been shared in this presentation. I very much appreciate it. I just want to highlight as well that um, a lot of people are very impoverished, to the point that it's beyond a paycheck to being unhoused or homelessness. I mean, people are hanging by a thread, and many homes have not been able to make upgrades, or they may realize that the conditions they live in, they can be red tag at any moment, and they prefer not to accept the service, whether it's a rebate, whether it's free, whether a contractor does it. They don't want it because they don't want government at their door because they fear government. And two, they fear being red tagged. And this is a real problem, because some of these interventions will require permits. And the moment that a contractor or however it is that these community organizations that they deploy these interventions, they're going to reject the service because they don't want to be kicked out of their house, because they know that the conditions they live in may put them at risk. And I don't see anyone, just like, we have a sort of a more mature deployment of EV chargers. It's a problem. And I don't even see the starting point of solving these issues within the appliance um, um, initiative. So I, I mean, all I can do as a member here is make it a high priority and continue to advocate to make sure that at the highest levels of California, governor's office, to the legislature, to the leadership of every agency that's involved, have to get in a room and figure this out, because this program will not succeed if we don't remove these barriers. Thank you.
Thank you, Luis. I'm noting that we've got some coalition hands raised, so let's turn it over to them before I continue down the discussion with our committee members. Response there from the coalition?
Yeah, I just wanted to respond to a little bit of that comment specifically regarding like the permitting, for example. I just wanted to highlight that I completely agree. High level state coordination does have to happen around the initiatives. However, to a point that Edgar raised in our presentation, something like permitting, which absolutely supports decarbonization efforts, that is a regional and local initiative. And you have to go city or county in order to facilitate that kind of supportive ancillary policy that will help residential decarbonization. And something that has been going on in the Bay Area with their appliance standards for heat pump water heat, which apply to water heaters and currently just the water heaters, is a huge movement regionally across the 9 counties in the Bay Area to kind of get local municipalities to work on the permitting issues that folks have been seeing in residential renovations. So I just wanted to kind of give a yes and to that point, but this is where the regional approach becomes incredibly important and really vital to the initiatives. Absolutely high level state coordination, but some of these things have to be worked out locally and regionally, and that's where a little more of a nuanced approach is necessary. So I just wanted to yes and that point.
I'm sorry, I can't see hands raised, so I'm going to jump in real quick just to clarify. But that might not be entirely accurate, because when you get into manufactured homes, the local municipalities point the finger at the state. So I'm not saying that you're right or wrong, but we need an answer. Who's responsible? Because when it comes to manufactured homes, it may be the state, because that's what the local municipalities are saying.
Yeah, and I will say, Luis, the San Joaquin Valley pilot did a lot of work with manufactured and mobile homes, and so we can definitely follow up on some of the lessons learned there.
Thank you. Noting that, Christine, your hand is raised. Is it on this item, this discussion moment?
Yeah, I just wanted to say really briefly to Luis just that I totally agree that all the things you raised in terms of people being worried about losing their homes and evictions and not wanting people to come in because of code violations, those are all things that we see really, really regularly. And the one thing about it is that we do have solutions to that, which is like working with trusted community-based organizations that people have relationships with and expanding those relationships. And so why resourcing that aspect of the work, while generally undervalued, is actually really important for successful retrofits. That's all. But thank you for raising those.
Thank you. As a facilitator, I'm going to pause the discussion for a moment and acknowledge that we have, I believe, 3 committee members who have joined us during this time. I'm going to invite Kevin, Ray, and Juan to state their presence, their pronouns, and their organization, please.
Hey, this is Peter. Oh, beat you there. Mayor Ray Leon, City of Huron, and the Leap Institute, Executive Director, Founder. Pleasure to be here with everybody. Gracias.
Thank you, Ray.
Kevin Hamilton with SJV Medical Advocates for Healthy Air. Him. And again, happy to be here today. Sorry I was running a little late.
Good to have you. Juan?
Good afternoon, everyone. Juan Flores with the Center on Race, Poverty, and the Environment, based in Delano, Kern County, in the Central Valley.
Thank you. All right, we'll continue the discussion on this item. I did have hands raised. The next was Martha Dina and then Ray. Martha Dina, go ahead.
Well, I think much of the answers were done, but I do want to lift up something Chris said, and that's, not sure how to operationalize it, but I think, it might be something that the EJAC and perhaps Chanel and others might want to think through. This, doing a holistic healthy homes approach to the work is something that the EJAC has been saying, about the solar program and from, 2006, right? You need a comprehensive whole homes approach, looking at the models that many of us worked on for many years with lead and pesticide and mold, where we worked for years with communities, and we had to change building code, and we had to really work with building and safety so that if there was somebody creating a hazard, you can come in and stop it. And so much was done in a very dynamic way, working at the state level, to make it harder to disturb lead paint in a way that wasn't safe, working with the city folks to make sure that actually they could stop work if things were being done illegally. But the bigger issue is that the other part of that how we work with the agency to do this is working with the trusted partners, that if they knock on your door, you will trust them because they're your neighbor. They're someone you know from your church, from your child's school, because especially right now where trust in government is eroded, where many communities are being targeted. And so that fear is rampant. So figuring out how to do that work and finding the resources to be able to do and fund those energy navigators who can help us get that work done. Again, what we saw as we wrote as building decarbonization was a policy that many municipalities and others were pursuing, that we had to say, for this to work, let's do more planning and thinking through about how to do this. So I really appreciate all the work that the coalition has done. And I'm going to stop talking, but I really want to think about what we as EJAC can do, particularly working with CARB, and what are the lessons learned here about how to work with community, how to do the listening, how to incorporate as much as possible that co-design, that bottom-up design, so that the program works. And starting with the unintended consequences is really key before you get really far down the line on a program and then you're, oh, wait, this isn't working. That correction does, and you've just heard it. You've heard it, on the charging stations for EV cars, these other things, right? If you don't begin with how do we make this affordable and accessible first, then it will not work. So I, again, appreciate all this work and I'm looking forward to seeing how these programs roll out.
Thank you. Additional discussion from the committee? So at this time, we are on the agenda item to talk about building decarbonization, just to clarify for those attending virtually. Looking for any discussion from the committee on this? Kevin, go ahead.
Yes, thanks. As Martha mentions, some of us have been pushing this for quite a long time, and we've seen it sort of torn apart into pieces, and the focus on small appliances is an example of that. So you've got this program over here that's pushing EV chargers, this program over here that's pushing these appliances. And then again, you've got the other piece, which is how do I get every municipality to pass some kind of building code upgrade that facilitates all of this equipment being put into these homes? It's been really successful. I have to compliment the state on pushing this forward in the new home development side, because when they're building new houses now, all of these things are possible. Again, the problem has always been, what do we do with the aging houses that are not going to support this kind of equipment because they weren't built to do that. Again, just pitching in there the idea that we've proposed solutions for this in the past. I think there's been paper upon paper written now. CARB's role here, from my perspective, is to pass some kind of a reg or move a reg based on legislation that's already there that mandates that these things be retrofitted in and or always in new housing. And then once it's statewide and it's being pushed from that level, it forces the local municipalities to adopt it and figure out how to put it into their building codes. And again, it leaves the state with focusing on incentive programs. Now, you would think the LCFS would be the big wonderkin here, come in and put that money up. Well, I can tell you right now, if you go down, even if your house can take this water heater, for instance, as an example. I know we like to talk about EV charges, but let's talk about something simple like that. If you want to go over to a Home Depot, they'll talk to you about the utilities discount program, and you'll turn around and find out that this thing costs, anywhere from $800 to $1,000, and this wonderful program from PG&E will knock $100 or $200 off it. You're still not going to be able to afford it. So, there's just a lot of this can all be solved, but it has to be solved holistically. You have to look at the whole house. Again, trying to tear pieces apart and install this thing here. Now we're going to do this, piecemealing that in. This is a house we're talking about. So again, I know I'm probably being repetitious a bit to what other people have already said, but I do want to reinforce that. Thank you.
Thank you, Kevin. Christine, did you want to respond?
Yeah, I had 2 points. One point I wanted to say about one of our big successes with the CEC direct install program is that we have a non-capped amount of money. There's an average amount, but not a cap for deferred maintenance, which is like a huge deal because, you go in the houses and you want to put in a new water heater, but the walls are covered in mold, or there's a big hole in the ceiling, or, that all of that stuff has to be addressed. and is a really important part of these programs so that it's like it improves people's lives in the near term, but also the long term in terms of GHG reduction. But the other thing I was going to say is in terms of like the piecemeal approach, that's also really why another reason why we're pushing for an interagency working group to really think through how these programs impact. And I don't know what it's going to look like, when it gets brought to the CARB board, but at least the Bay Area one doesn't include stoves or ovens, and ovens are typically the thing that triggers the service upgrade. So if we have modeling of upgrade and programs that don't include the thing that triggers the service upgrade, and everybody says, oh, we don't have to calculate that in because it's not going to happen. But in that case, we can end up leaving people without the ability over the long term to cook. So that's just, again, I don't know whether stoves and ovens should be or will be included in the California standards, but at the very least, it needs to be modeled out, and there needs to be coordination among agencies, because in the end, we're working towards a fully electric ecosystem.
Thank you. Edgar?
Yes, I'm actually responding to one of the first comments, I believe, made by EJEC member Luis, speaking to the issues about affordability. I believe he made a comment about the issues of just being able to meet our low-income folks trying to meet their hierarchy of needs of paying rent, food, their essential needs. Building decarbonization, if done well, if done equitable, and through the holistic whole homes approach, we can lower folks' utility bills by installing energy efficient meaning appliances that are using less electricity than they're currently using. But big picture affordability, the more folks, particularly wealthy folks in wealthy communities, are able to, and have the financial means to get off gas systems, low-income folks will be left behind with the socialized cost of maintaining gas systems too. So a holistic homes approach and a targeted approach to low-income folks and help and prioritize them first in terms of electrification is a really big benefit to this affordability crisis that we're dealing with. Not just affordability in terms of utility bills, but just being able to afford the essential hierarchy and needs of being able to pay rent and other essentials. So just want to add to that point too.
Thank you, Edgar. Matt, I see your hand.
Yeah, I was just curious if anybody can help me find an inventory of, the homes that have been excluded from weatherization programs, energy partner programs, or how many mobile homes are there in California, or even just on Cherokee Way in Stockton, that have been left behind a couple decades. Is there an inventory of outdated homes that are currently killing their occupants who are excluded from California programs?
That's exactly a great question, Matt, in terms of like the type of analysis we want to see CARB do. A lot of the analyses that we see are very macro level, average, like, average bill savings is this, or, average cost is that. Doesn't really get into the weeds of like what it might look like for specific households that have very high needs. And like, for example, in the San Joaquin Valley pilot, a lot of mobile homes were covered. And when we talk about cost for repair, those costs for repair were an average of several $1,000s. In some cases, it was very small amount of money. And in a very few cases, it was way more than that. So that's what brought the average up to a few $1,000s, is in some cases, they were talking tens of thousands of dollars just to be able to install the appliances in those homes, given the amount of upgrade that was needed. And as you know, sometimes we're not talking about natural gas to electric. Sometimes we're talking about like wood or propane to electric, which is a whole nother beast in itself. So that question is exactly the type of question we'd like to answer, because we'd like to get a more tangible idea of what we're talking about in terms of costs and upgrades needed, so that we can really make a plan instead of putting this really on the residents to figure out, which is kind of the current model of that the agencies have.
That's awesome. Just kind of what I'm getting at too is that the state has been patting itself on the back for, supportive programs for the past decade and a half, but it's precluded so many Californians. I mean, it's not as if those aren't injuries, right? Those people have absorbed this pollution from their weak homes. They paid excessive costs, at cooling and heating their homes. And just for the duration of the AB 32 funded programs, the state's been derelict, and that's not without injury. And so assessing the negligence of the state and of the real estate market would be super useful. I think I know the answer.
I think the overlap, if you started looking at like redlining maps and like other maps, is pretty stark. Like this is a result of some pretty racist investment and policy decisions. And I know you're going to hear from Michael Wara later, who will talk to you about extreme heat and all the work over there. But I think you're absolutely right. And that's why BEEP is so focused on this rule, because we really think this is a chance for us to change the pattern of prior climate programs that are very incentive, low-hanging fruit based, to one that centers our communities first. And I know it's going to be more expensive, and we still have a lot of pushback in the legislature. So it's really not even just the agencies. Even the legislature says, well, gosh, if we get a bunch of high income people to adapt, then it's going to make it cheaper for everyone. Well, wait a minute. In the process of that, you're leaving behind all of those communities who can't afford to do this, and they're suffering real harm as a result of not being able to change this technology. So totally right. And we hope this is an opportunity to get it done differently. And we want this to be a model, which is why we applaud things like the CEC's Equitable Building Decarb program, which we've presented to you before, because it was such a great process to co-design that program. And we're really looking forward to helping the outcomes so we can see how it works when you let communities help you design things.
Yeah, thank you. Really grateful for your all's work. If only those communities were better at election donations.
Thank you. Martha Dina?
Oh, well, I have a number of questions, and I'm wondering if, as we think through the kinds of policies that we need to put in place to make this work, one of the things that the city of Los Angeles has that was helpful in the lead remediation work was systematic code enforcement. So there's every 2 years, every rental unit supposedly every rental unit in Los Angeles is supposed to be inspected. And there's criteria for that inspection, including, peeling paint, things like that. So I'm wondering, there you have a lot of sort of housing quality data, right? Rental unit data. But if that might be some of the policies that we begin to say, we need this at the state level, and we need it regionally. So that we're linking that to, heat and air conditioning and all the resiliency things that we need.
Yeah, I will say I love to hear that for LA. City of Sacramento, for example, where we're sitting, has a voluntary rental housing inspection program where most landlords self-certify if their units are up to code. So you can imagine there's not a lot of issues documented through that process, and it's very complaint driven. And as Luis mentioned, if you know that there's an issue and you're already housing insecure, like I've talked to tenants who you can like push the floor around their sink or toilet and it moves, and they're like, yeah, I'm not calling code because I can't afford to move. So we're stumbling into a lot of really macro issues, which has largely been our feedback from agencies, is like, look, we're not responsible for the housing crisis. We can't solve the housing crisis. Absolutely. We are not asking CARB to solve the housing crisis, but we are acknowledging that until those issues are solved, any program that has to do with changing your housing is going to trip into those same inequities and gaps. Because even if you find a code issue, like the city of Sacramento had like $1 million pilot to help people who couldn't afford to get their homes up to code, and they ran out of that money in a snap, and they were like, hey, this was really great. I wish we had more money to do this. So I think it's really hitting this intersection of issues around, to Matt's point too, around like energy upgrades, investment, power mapping, housing security and vulnerability, crappy corporate landlords, all of that. And like, how do we address something that doesn't exacerbate and further harm those same communities? Because it's definitely not consistent across the state. And so I think what we're looking for is state intervention, but also acknowledging the power at the legislature and where that sits, are not totally confident that will happen. And so are working through the local pilots to at least do that locally. But I know Edgar and Chris probably have stuff they want to say on that.
Any additional discussion or comments from our committee or our guest speakers?
No, I think
my hand is raised.
Oh, we thought that was an old hand.
Thanks. Martha Dina, I'll pause here. Luis, I see your hand. And Martha Dina, you said you had a number of questions. Are you?
No, that's it. I'm done.
You're good. Okay. Luis, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, I'm very thankful for the panel. They certainly know and understand the challenges. I did want to clarify that the only reason why I know what I've shared, but is nowhere near a an extensive list of challenges is because actually my team has been doing what we call weather resilience interventions, including bringing HVAC solutions, mitigation into homes, water systems, air purifiers, just a number of different solutions, all free of cost. And there's a lot of challenges that even go beyond who benefits from this, because the people who need it the most are, for the reasons I mentioned before, declining the free intervention. This is not even, we're not talking about having to go through a rebate, the state. We got the resource, it's free. But anytime you tap into a panel, whether you put in a water heater, a range, anytime you tap into a panel, you need a permit. It's going to be challenging. We've already learned from my team going out and deploying level 2 and level 3 chargers. When I say that the state of California needs to organize and coordinate across agencies, is because we're living those situations. We're facing it. We're not just documenting it. We're actually out there installing this equipment. And it deeply sad, it's upsetting to see that people who need this are more afraid to get it because of the permitting element. There's a fear that someone going to look at a meter isn't just going to look at the meter and making sure that's okay, because we make sure it's okay, and we got licensed contractors to make sure it's okay. But then they're going to go out there and look at whether the house is okay, right? And at some point, might be dealing with mold, might be dealing with other issues. And so I think it's important to be able to overcome these issues. And I thought I heard earlier that there was a sort of a more holistic approach, and I think that's going to be necessary. My biggest concern is that the people who need it the most are not going to get the benefit, and the people who sort of need it are going to be the ones who get it, or maybe even people who don't need it. Another problem is that the state programs are also, again, looking at statewide contractors instead of just saving the money and go directly to trusted organizations in community to help implement these projects. As I've said this time and time again, is these statewide contractors that will eventually come out to our community and ask us to do it anyway, right? And so we can get more resources into communities by building direct partnerships. And I know the state doesn't want to deal with 100 or 500 contracts, but at some point, you got to do that. The other is the contractors. The community has trusted, licensed contractors. And a lot of times there's not enough outreach to them to let them know and to help facilitate them getting on these databases. We see the databases, it's the same players all the time, the same ones that have language barriers, that have attitude issues, and a lot of times we have to be really careful, especially with these rebates. I mean, are these people really being honest? Right? I mean, so we need to make sure that whatever mechanism is used is that, anyways, I like to continue to stay engaged at the research level, at the informing the program level. I want to volunteer mostly my team, because they're the ones out there actually getting it done, to help inform some of these issues. A lot of it has already been brought up, but I'll leave that invitation open, that we would like to help inform as well, given that we're doing this kind of work already.
Thank you. Additional discussion from the committee on this item? All right, seeing no hands.
Wait.
Go ahead.
Well, I'm wondering if, like we've done with some of the other bigger issues that we've brought up, does the committee want to develop a resolution that that sort of outlines the major issues, the design stuff, and some of the concerns that we want to present to the board, and as they make their decisions around building decarbonization?
This is Dr. Catherine. I would be in favor if BEEP would be willing to help advise us as experts, because it's definitely not something that I personally carry a lot of expertise in.
Agree. I mean, agree to help, not saying agree to no expertise. Sorry, agree to help.
It's Kevin Hamilton. I agree 100%. Yep. And I'd like to help in that, with BEEP working on that. Yep. It's a great idea. Thank you, Martha Dina.
Do we need to make a motion so that it gets on the next agenda? I never follow. I'm terrible at those rules. Okay, good.
This is the facilitator. No, because this was not an agendized motion for action today. Yeah.
Okay.
But we can certainly take it offline and take some next steps on that. Okay. Seeing no additional discussion at this time, I'd like to thank our guest speakers and also give them opportunity for any closing comments.
I think we said it all. I'm looking at the screen.
Wonderful. Thank you for joining us today. The time is now 2:29 and we do have a scheduled break. We'll go ahead and take a 5-minute break and return at 2:35 for our next guest speaker.
Where we are.
All right, that concludes our break. The time is now 2:35. We will continue our meeting, go back on record. We'll move to agenda item number 8, the EJAC guest speaker presentation on cap and trade affordability research. I will turn it over to co-chair Dr. Catherine.
Thank you, everyone. If we could bring up the slides of the background on the cap and trade program, please. I'm going to offer a little bit of grounding in the history that enabled the cap and trade program. And first, just recollect back in the beginning of the formation of this iteration of EJAC, when we all came together as a group to start working on advising what became the 2022 scoping plan. I remember early on, we were trying to figure out how to organize ourselves as a committee, and our initial approach was to have work groups that were around the regulated sectors. And in that meeting, I said, but what about overarching programs like cap and trade? And Martha Dina said, that's a really good point. And then I ended up raising my hand and volunteering myself to coordinate what initially was the cap and trade work group and has since evolved into the carbon markets work group that looks at the two very weighty programs of cap and trade and the low carbon fuel standard. So all of that is to say, we've discussed this program for a very long time because it has very important implications for environmental justice communities. And at the same time, we've been having this conversation in progress. So just as a friendly reminder, the program is up for extension. That's part of why the governor mentioned it in his budget yesterday. And there are ongoing conversations in the legislature CARB has a pending rulemaking that's been delayed several times, and so this still is very much a timely conversation. So want to extend my thanks to Katie Valenzuela, who was just here presenting on behalf of BEEP, but had to leave, Dan Ress at Center on Race, Poverty, and the Environment, Connie Cho with Asian Pacific Environmental Network, and other colleagues who helped in the creation of these background slides that we've used in many different spaces now. So if we could go ahead and go to the first slide. A reality that we all, as EJAC committee members, know really well. It's an important place to start the conversation by acknowledging that the Air Resources Board's original charge is to ensure clean air for all Californians. And while California claims environmental leadership, we still have the most polluted air basins in the entire United States. The San Joaquin Valley is the most polluted for fine particles, and the San Joaquin Valley and South Coast air basins compete for the dubious title of most polluted for ozone. Our communities have waited for decades for relief from the public health and social costs of dirty air. A 2007 study estimated for the San Joaquin Valley alone that not meeting clean air standards was costing our economy $6 billion a year. The researchers acknowledged that this figure was likely underestimated, and we're talking about costs like emergency room visits, lost productivity in terms of missed school and work days, and premature death, losses that are very difficult to quantify. Each of us who do this work carry with us our own experiences of breathing problems. I myself have bad allergies and asthma and have since I was a child. And in doing this work, we also carry the stories of countless community members that we work with that share things like holding a child while a parent has to rush them to the emergency room because they're turning blue from an asthma attack. So it's very difficult to really quantify these costs. And that's the lived reality that we need to ground ourselves in when we're talking about how are we going to get to clean air and climate justice in California. Next slide, please. So actually at the beginning of my career working on air pollution issues in 2006, the Global Warming Solutions Act was passed. And as important as it was to acknowledge the climate crisis and our need to address it, it also shifted a lot of the conversation from clean air to climate policy. It established the 2020 target of achieving 1990 emissions levels. And it also identified that low-income communities and communities of color need special attention. The EJAC was created in AB 32, as well as these requirements for things like outreach to EJ communities before adopting plans and regulations, which we pushed really hard on during the scoping plan and were unfortunately shut down over. Also ensuring regulations do not disproportionately impact EJ communities, and requiring that CARB's efforts to achieve for climate have to complement efforts to achieve and maintain health protective air quality standards and to reduce toxic air contaminants. So when we hear responses from CARB like, well, cap and trade isn't meant to address air pollution, here we have in the enabling legislation a requirement that climate efforts have to complement our approach to achieving clean air. AB 32 also required certain standards like related to technological feasibility, that the approaches are non-duplicative, and that reductions must be real, permanent, quantifiable, verifiable, and enforceable. Those are really important requirements. Next slide, please. So at its inception, because AB 32 allowed CARB to a menu of options, but it didn't say that they had to create a cap and trade program. This was something that CARB chose to implement as a tool to tackle what they consider hard to achieve emissions reductions. As implemented, the cap and trade program is the only greenhouse gas control measure for stationary sources like refineries and oil and gas production. According to an analysis from the Legislative Analyst's Office, the cap and trade program was initially promoted as a backstop measure and subsequently has become a major part of how the Air Resources Board proposes making reductions, which means that the program needs to be much more stringent if we hope to meet our goals. These stationary sources are predominantly located in low-income communities and communities of color and have not seen the level of reductions they would have if CARB had used more direct emissions controls. Next slide, please. So we've had the benefit of having some speakers like Caroline Farrell a few months ago who have helped provide us this historical perspective. So again, to summarize how the EJAC has engaged on the cap and trade programs since the inception, when the program was proposed, the EJAC and advocates raised concerns that the program as implemented by CARB would not sufficiently reduce emissions, and that it in fact risks increasing emissions in environmental justice neighborhoods because the ability to trade or purchase emissions credits at a fraction of the cost of actual emissions reductions fails to create sufficient cost incentive, which means that those facilities will continue to produce greenhouse gases and harmful pollutants that are detrimental to public health. At that time, members of the AB 32 EJAC successfully sued the Air Resources Board for failing to comply with the California Environmental Quality Act's requirements to analyze and adopt feasible alternatives to the cap and trade program. So while CARB complied with the court's order to improve its alternatives under CEQA, the state has yet to improve the stringency of its cap and trade framework. As you all know, in the 2020s, we've continued submitting comments through the work group and inviting expert speakers. And in November 2024, we passed a resolution that frankly has been dismissed by CARB leadership. While CVAC ideologically opposes the cap and trade program and market-based programs like it because it is entrenched, we are focused on what reforms can be made to protect our communities. Next slide, please. Academic research that was published after AB 32 was signed into law proved that the environmental justice community's concerns about cap and trade were well-founded, and that a concentration of pollution in low-income communities and communities of color remains a reality. As seen on the left of the slide, the industrial sector particularly has not reduced its emissions significantly. And on the right-hand side, the charts show that emissions remain concentrated in Black and Indigenous people and people of color communities. Next slide, please. So subsequent legislative action providing CARB further direction once the cap and trade program was initiated, there were 2 linked bills in 2016 that clearly reinforced the legislature's desire to reduce emissions while maximizing co-benefits to our communities. AB 197 established the Joint Legislative Committee on Climate Change Policies and directed CARB to prioritize direct emissions measures. SB 32 established the 2030 emissions target. Next slide, please. AB 398 in 2017 authorized carbon markets until 2030 with the following conditions: limited offset use in banking, price controls. It unfortunately set the industry assistance factor at 100% for all industries, regardless of leakage risk. And just to demystify some of the wonky language there, leakage risk is the risk that an industry will move out of state because of the high costs of complying with the program. So setting it at 100% means that every industry regulated under cap and trade has 100% risk for leakage, which just frankly is not realistic. AB 38 also required regular reports to the legislature, and it created the Independent Emissions Market Advisory Committee, who we've engaged in dialogue with and heard speakers from as well. A linked bill was Assembly Bill 617, which created the Community Air Protection Program, which I know you all are familiar with. This was a much delayed effort with partial consultation with environmental justice groups, which resulted in a program that still has significant defects, but the claim at the time was that this linked bill was how we would get to air pollution concerns. Next slide, please. So there's a reference at the bottom if people would like to check out the whole 10-point plan, but the purpose of this slide is to show this Latham & Watkins consulting firm was actually hired to create a proposal for industry, and AB 617 was part of that proposal. So give EJ communities a lot of busy work with air monitoring and creating plans that don't mean anything, that go nowhere. So AB 617 created the Community Air Protection Program, which in theory targets overburdened communities with additional monitoring and/or emissions reductions plans. It's implemented by CARB and local air districts and has many significant gaps. There was a provision ensuring that stationary sources have what's called best available control technology, or BACT, and best available retrofit control technology, or BARCT, which has not lived up to its promise. And much of the money, at least in the San Joaquin Valley, has been distributed to polluting industries or staffing at air districts, not to the communities most impacted by ongoing pollution. Despite the program's problems, I do absolutely want to acknowledge and emphasize that local groups have leveraged it for important gains. I myself serve on the AB 617 steering committee in Stockton, and we've developed an innovative collaborative project with the enforcement division, partly through our relationships with staff through AB 617, but also separately to try to address emissions from heavy-duty diesel trucks. And I know other communities have also experienced some successes. And there are still many fixes that are needed to strengthen this program. Last slide, please. Here we sit in 2025. There is little to no evidence that the Community Air Protection Program or any other AB 32 initiative is providing sufficient emissions reductions and public health protections to address the inequities resulting from the implementation of cap and trade, or to help us reach our climate goals, even if we were willing to set the equity issues aside, which I know, colleagues, we are not. What this quote acknowledges is that the Air Resources Board leadership and others have known for years that cap and trade is not enough to get us there. So this quote from then Chair Mary Nichols says, in 2018, we now know that we are not on a line that's going to meet the 2030 target, much less the 2045 goal of carbon neutrality. And so we're going to have to step back and take a serious look at the role that cap and trade and other measures play in getting us to that point. The experiment of California's cap and trade program has granted significant cost savings for the largest stationary sources of climate and air pollutants through the trade or purchase of emissions credits at a fraction of the cost of direct regulation. Direct regulation would have guaranteed real and verifiable emissions reductions. So remember those enabling pieces of legislation and direction. Some decision makers claim that cap and trade is a California success story for climate policy, despite strong evidence to the contrary. It has primarily functioned as a way to generate money. Revenue generated by cap and trade cannot be used as a justification to keep the program as is. It must be acknowledged that if the program functions as it is supposed to, the funds will greatly diminish over time, and this is acknowledged in our resolution. Furthermore, current funding must be better directed to frontline environmental justice communities. I'm proud to be a part of many coalitions with lots of smart people that have been engaging and many groups in California's environmental justice movement that have developed robust and consensus-based positions, including us as EJAC through our work group. We can improve the cap and trade program as part of the current extension to ensure cleaner air, cleaner water, and more affordable energy and transportation. I'm looking forward to hearing a bit more about equity issues and energy affordability from our guest presenter today, Michael Wara with Stanford. And as I pass it to Michael, I want to express my deep gratitude for the time that his team has taken not only to research these issues, but to come and share previous findings with us on the low carbon fuel standard and now today about cap and trade and energy affordability. So with that, if we can transition over to Michael's slides, I will pass it to you, Michael.
Good afternoon. And I just want to say how honored I am to be presenting before the EJAC. I think it's it's one of the most important and valuable elements of the sort of broader environmental efforts in California that we really try to be inclusive, and it's a real honor to present before you. I'm going to speak briefly about the reauthorization challenge that is currently before the legislature and the governor, and of course, all of the stakeholders, and talk about some ideas that my team has been working on to really focus on affordability as a key issue. And I think we can all agree, and I very much enjoyed the rich discussion about building electrification and in the end, how it came back to um, issues of housing affordability, and housing quality for Californians. And, I think the cap and trade program, as we consider reauthorization in this session, really needs to be focused on those challenges as well. Next slide, please. Um, so I would just in leading in various ways the impacts of climate change. And however we may feel about cap and trade, I think it is important as a state to maintain our leadership, both in terms of taking the issue seriously, trying to make constructive action in a variety of ways, and trying to improve the equity of the actions that we do take. I'm going to talk a little bit about affordability and explain why I think it's the key challenge as we think about extension of cap and trade. Briefly about decarbonization strategy in the state, and argue that strategy should influence. Is my audio coming through okay? Maybe not.
Michael, this is the facilitator. It is skipping just a little bit, but so far I think we've been able to understand you. So I'll invite you to continue. And if I need to pause you at some point, I will. Is that all right?
Thank you. Yeah, that's
Thank
great.
you.
Okay. I just wanted to make sure because I saw someone in the chat saying they were having trouble. I'll talk about some work we did on the climate credit. Also discuss some preliminary work we've done on increasing the allocation of allowances to utilities in order to provide resources for utilities to give people larger rebates on their electricity bills. And then briefly mention some other ideas that we have that we're working on. Next slide, please. So affordability in the energy sector has become a central concern since the last time the legislature considered reauthorization of cap and trade back in 2017. It was just after passage of that legislation that the Napa-Sonoma fire siege occurred, accompanied shortly thereafter by the Thomas Fire in Southern California. And those two fires really marked the beginning of the utility-caused wildfire epidemic that we appear to still be suffering through. Those fires, the losses associated with those fires, as well as investments to try to harden the grid and upgrade the grid and make it safer, or just we'll make it safer, have caused electricity prices to rise quite dramatically in California. And a key thing to note that I'll talk more about is that this impacts different parts of the state differently. If you live in coastal California where the fog comes in at night, these bill increases are real and they are noticeable in your bill, but they are not nearly of the same magnitude as if you live in the hotter inland parts of California. And so I'm going to focus on those inland warm climate zones as a key place to really be focusing on electricity affordability and the interaction between the cap and trade program and this issue, which, people talk about comfort. I think it's more appropriate, particularly in the hot parts of California, to talk about public safety and public health. People need to be able to afford the electricity to cool their homes during the hot summer months. And at present, close to 1/5 of electricity consumers in California are in serious bill arrearage with their investor-owned utility. So this is a major problem. As discussed on the prior panel, utility debt can be a cause for eviction. And so it feeds through into many other challenges that Californians are currently facing. Next slide, please. So ARB, as was mentioned, has initiated a rulemaking to consider extension of cap and trade. As in the past, they hired really what I think of as a really very strong modeling team that comes from UC Davis and UC Berkeley. That has estimated the potential impacts of different scenarios on allowance prices. And this is a really important piece of the picture to understand. under the current allowance price is down. It's getting close to the price floor. It's down in the mid-20s. And if reauthorization does not occur and the program ends, therefore, at the end of 2030, allowance prices are going to decline to the price floor. That's shown in this figure. It's a little bit hard to see, at least on my screen, but you can see the bar that's farthest to the left is in the figure is kind of down around $25. That's the scenario if legislation does not pass. Now, notice that all the other scenarios, both for 2030 and further into the future, extending out to 2045, have very much higher carbon prices. And those prices are created by the scarcity of allowances that will occur if an allowance you hold today is usable out into the distant future. And so we should expect, and I'll just say about the modeling work that's been done by Bushnell and colleagues. This is the third modeling effort, and the last two proved to be highly accurate in terms of predicting the future pathway of the program. And so this is not just this is someone with a track record of making fairly good predictions about the broad, not with precision, but the roughly right story of what may happen with carbon prices. And they're saying now prices are going to go a lot higher if we reauthorize. And that's really driven by fundamentals in that market and the challenges of decarbonizing California. Next slide, please. So all of those prices, the variation in prices have very large implications for the amount of money that might be available due to the sale of allowances from cap and trade. And this is just a figure from a recent legislative analyst's office report trying to educate some of the new members about the issues at play in cap and trade. And the thing I would just draw your eye to is that the difference between numbers that are near the price floor or close to, at the February 2025 auction price, where the cap and trade program, the total allowance value is between $7 and $8 billion. And of course, about half of that goes in free allowances as to emitters, as was mentioned. But as if the price were to go to a much higher value, we're looking at much larger amounts of money being raised in the auctions, but also feeding through into energy prices that regular people have to pay, both when they consume electricity and when they purchase gasoline at the pump. Next slide, please. Pardon me, I'm getting over a cold. So how do we, so I think as we think about these issues, like the potential impacts to affordability, the not always uncertain, but likely trajectory of the program if reauthorization occurs, it's also important to think about like how are we actually reducing emissions in California? Where emission reductions have occurred, and I heartily agree with the point that was just made that emissions in the industrial sector have not fallen, but the place where they have fallen quite a bit is in the electric power sector. And I just want to note that electric power is a place where we have managed to cut emissions roughly in half from their peak levels in the early 2000s. And that success continues. It's not without challenges. As I mentioned, affordability is a major issue, but it is not being primarily driven by the changes to the system that are driving these emission reductions. It's really being driven by wildfire costs primarily, and perhaps secondarily by rooftop solar. Next slide, please. Or policies around compensation for rooftop solar. So we took a look at the climate credit, which is something that many people, all investor-owned utility customers receive. It's basically a bill credit that people currently get in April and October of each year. And just tried to think about how this credit could be redesigned to create a more equitable system and to help especially low-income Californians in warm places afford to pay their electricity bills and consume enough electricity to be safe in their homes. Shown here is a figure that illustrates the typical low-income customer bills in coastal California and in the warmer parts of California. And we this is defined in terms of climate zones and electricity rates, but you could think of this as, you know, the LA region and the Bay Area being in the coastal zone, and Bakersfield, for example, being in the warm climate zone, also Sacramento. Um, and what you see is the blue line, the cold zone, coastal zone customers have a bill that ranges, but it's around $100 a month. It's lower in the 2 months, April and October, when the climate credit is received on the bill. And the climate credit, again, comes from allowances that are given to the utilities that they sell at the auction. They take that money and they give it as a bill credit through to customers. So we said, could we and this goes to all customers, irrespective of income. Shown here in orange are what the warm zone low income customer bill looks like. And you can start to see why a lot of people are having trouble affording their electricity bill. If the average care customer bill is $300 a month for several months a year, that's a very challenging situation for people to be able to afford. And they have two choices: go into bill arrearage or live in unsafe conditions in their homes. In our experiment, we evaluated reallocating the money that currently goes to give high-income coastal customers a rebate to those low-income customers in the warm places. And what we show is that you can actually basically remove that peak from the inland bill and make bills in inland California closer to $150 a year or $150 a month all through the summer, rather than having this large peak that, you know, is pulling on people's monthly budgets for at least 4 months of the year. So this was a fairly conservative approach. It just looks at, what if we take the high income coastal customer money and devote it to the lower income warm climate zone customers? And we think that would make a ton of sense. And this is preserving both rebates for rooftop solar customers and also rebates for the low-income customers in the coastal zones. Next slide, please. We've also evaluated whether we could just simply give utilities more allowances, require them to sell those allowances at auction, and then rebate that new source of money to customers to try to lower electric bills. Now, I just want to note that there are lots of ways to get money back into people's hands from the cap and trade. We could give people a tax credit. We could give them a refundable tax credit that's deposited directly into their bank account, similar to how the EITC was kind of pre-deposited into people's accounts during COVID. This is one way. We think this is a way that doesn't require a lot of new infrastructure to implement, because the utilities are already doing this, and the only question is how many allowances they have to play with and to give money, you know, to sort of recycle money back to customers. And notice here though that increasing the pool by even fairly substantial amounts doesn't lead to super large decreases in bills. We go from an 18% reduction, which is kind of the normal, the amount we get now, to a 30% reduction. That's not nothing, that extra 12%, but it's also important to put this number in context. Electricity bills have been increasing by double-digit margins for many of the last few years, and so this could be something that we do and then is just wiped out by a rate increase. So we think our conclusion from this is that we should proceed with caution about using this tool as a way to kind of try to help people afford the energy transition. Next slide, please. Lastly, I just want to note that another option, and this relates back to the figure that I showed you of, you know, where are the reductions coming from, is to take a look at the needed investments in our electric system that are going to be required to get us to that zero carbon electric future, and use public money to make those investments, right? Basically, put the public sector into the power sector in a way that it really isn't at present. And we are also thinking through a policy suggestion where allowance value is used to borrow. The funds raised from the borrowing are used then to invest in the electric system, invest public dollars that would not generate an impact on bills for customers, to start to build some components of the transmission investments that are necessary to achieve that very low carbon future, and maybe do it at lower cost, because public borrowing is much lower cost than either utility borrowing or utility return on equity. Next slide, please. So in conclusion, just quickly, decarbonization, at least as the successful decarbonization that we're seeing, requires 100% clean electric power and electrification of end uses. That is the strategy that the state is in effect pursuing. It is a challenging strategy. It is not free. Reauthorization will likely raise cap and trade costs and therefore revenues. California should, we argue, use cap and trade money to buy down the transition cost, especially for low-income Californians that are most exposed to those costs. We think that that could make both electricity and decarbonization more affordable and accessible to all Californians, and that should be, and is, legislatively, has always been a goal of AB 32. And we think, in addition, that these, and I haven't mentioned this, but I think it's just worth saying in passing, that this will ensure that cap and trade is both economically and politically sustainable. Now, depending on your views about cap and trade, and I completely understand that many of the folks on this call, don't support emissions trading as a policy, and I sort of come to this discussion with the view that it's what we have, and it's a commitment that the governor has made and the legislative leadership has made to continue with. And so I'm of the view that we should try to make it as equitable and fair and as possible. And that's really where our suggestions are coming from. But it's also the case that these very high allowance prices would be unprecedented, and they require some care and some thoughtfulness as we approach the reauthorization conversation now that the May revise is out. I just note that in the May revise, which was released earlier this week after I shared these slides with the EJAC, there are some important changes to cap and trade that are proposed. In particular, a third of the CAL FIRE budget is being placed into the cap and trade GGRF money. So that'd be a very substantial increase in the amount of money that's going to CAL FIRE from the cap and trade revenues. And other than that, I guess the other significant change is really a shift in how high-speed rail, placing limits on the amount of money that high-speed rail gets from the GGRF, the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund, which is also important for freeing up money to do other things like provide these kinds of rebates. Historically, a number of the beneficiaries of cap and trade revenue have received it on a percentage basis. Like, so if you raise $1 billion, I believe high-speed rail gets 25% on the current rules. And so this would place a limit, an upper limit on that amount. And then that, as revenues rise, because allowance prices will rise, will free up money to do other things, including improve affordability of the program. Thank you.
Thank you. Looking to discussion from the committee. Matt, I see your hand raised.
Yeah, I just want to say thank you, Michael, for your analysis again, coming to this from the framework of this is the system that we have, how do we work within it. I appreciate you observing that not everybody's experience has been equal, that it's really a different thing running an air conditioner in this 1962 double-wide mobile home made out of tin off Southside Stockton, as opposed to living in the coastal elite zone where you don't really have any of these problems, but you get all the benefits. I appreciate the historic look back. That folks have been excluded for a long time. That's what environmental justice is. It's a historic framework for understanding privileges and burdens. And that within that, you've also arrived at a conclusion that I share, which is we can allocate this money however we want. This money can be directed towards those who are most vulnerable. And the idea that we're out here in this bizarro competitive equity framework where somehow poor folks are supposed to work harder to get the same level of investment from the state is really disgusting. And so I'll just say in closing that Um, the market's turned out to be a fraud. There is no such thing. When I was a school teacher, if 15% of my students failed, I got fired. So I'll just leave it at that and hope that we can get more progressive, more thoughtful, and more like self-reflective work out of this agency.
Thank you. Additional discussion from the committee? Luis, I see your hand raised, and then Kevin.
Yeah. Hello. Thank you for the presentation. There's a couple comments that I want to bring because I find them relevant as this discussion of reauthorization is happening. And this isn't necessarily an opinion of being for or against. This is a comment of what was promised to environmental justice and what hasn't been delivered to environmental justice. The last time the environmental justice was promised a meaningful stake in this process to assure that that cap and trade, which doesn't necessarily meant there was an agreement or a consensus, but there was AB 617. In the best of circumstances at that time, the belief of CARB leadership was that let's bring the air districts in, and I would say in accurate words, let's reel the air districts in, and making sure that environmental justice was leading the work of AB 617. It was a promise there. It was a promise. It was a commitment, I would say. I interpret it as a promise. What I hear more frequently is kind of a mindset that was there years ago when I first started. I've been doing this for over 25 years. So when I was first introduced to CARB, that's what they would say. But what they would say at that time was, we can't tell the air districts what to do. And so, well, I think what I heard, because I've been kind of off and on signal, a lot of talk about energy, but I'll get to that in a minute. The air districts have controlled AB 617. And at that time, there wasn't consensus for environmental justice about cap and trade extension. And some people wanted the 617, some people didn't. But that was an offering of the administration at that time. That was the Brown administration. I say that this has become just a large fund for air districts to control, but not for environmental justice to be able to bring meaningful interventions into environmental justice communities. And I want to highlight that, because whatever is going to get promised, for myself, for sure, it's going to be really hard to trust whatever gets put in front of the table to assure that environmental justice communities across California end up in a better outcome, given the lack of trust and the lack of commitment that 617 has given environmental justice communities. Now, in regards to energy interventions, what I was able to hear is a lot of ideas that continue to be dependent on large energy providers. And at what point, I just think, like, if I'm a patient, I go to a doctor, I don't just want to live off of meds for the rest of my life, just like I don't want to live off of large utility energy for the rest of my life. I mean, at what point do we start creating the pathway of energy savings through energy independence? I happen to live in a region that actually has a slogan, it's where the sun spends the winter. But the projects that I see is large scale solar and sort of these large contracts. And it's just, we're just basically transferring the ownership and, and, and look, I mean, I understand there's business opportunities out there, but why not create energy reduction savings as you were mentioning through energy independence, right? Through bringing solutions that people can own, and be able to do, cost savings. So, I mean, those are my thoughts right now. Not necessarily. Um, I mean, I guess that's what I would offer at this very moment. Not having heard the whole presentation. So, I don't know if you have any thoughts about that. Um, I, I I think that there's going to have to be some real actions as to what's there right now. Like right now, commitments on this budget, commitments right now to really believe that whatever is being presented is even real, right? Because let me use, sort of street terminology. We've been burned. So how is it that here's another promissory note when we've already been burned? Thank you.
I could try to respond to that. I mean, I don't disagree with you in essentially about most of what you said. I think this program has proven to be relatively inequitable. It has not achieved many of the objectives that were stated for it when created, and it has allowed facilities to continue emitting that need more stringent regulation. Um, I would just, and on the electric power side, I think the complexity is there about moving toward public ownership or even self-supply. There are technological and cost implications to that, and also practical legal implications. Just in the sense that if you look at the history of the two largest municipal utilities in California, LADWP and SMUD, it took decades to pry the systems from the hands of the investor-owned utilities that owned them prior to the creation of the government-run systems. And so I think we all need to be thinking in that way. Our team is actually looking at Australia, where systems for rooftop solar cost a fourth of what they cost in California. And that, trying to figure out how we could achieve that outcome in California, because that would completely change the ballgame in terms of the accessibility of rooftop systems. I think that's a project I hope to bring to California, but we're in a difficult position. We're in a difficult position because of the legal liability framework we have for wildfire and the costs that has created, combined with the negligence of the utilities prior to 2017 and 18. And we're in a difficult position because of the very ambitious timeline we have set for ourselves in terms of emission reductions. And so I guess where I come to with this is just to say that I think all of this requires a lot of care and balance. And I agree with you. If I were sitting in your shoes, I would be wanting to figure out how to bind the state to whatever commitments it makes as tightly as possible.
Thank you. Continuing the discussion, seeing Kevin Hamilton, your hand raised. Do you want to go ahead?
Yes, thank you, Michael. I really appreciate your presentation and your proposed approach, which 99% of them I agree with. Could you bring back that slide that shows the differences between the utility bills in the inland areas and the coastal areas?
We'll work on that. It'll take a moment, Kevin, but we'll get that going. Do you want to go ahead?
Okay. So what that slide really illustrates is the people who can. I mean, it's obvious on one front that the majority, though not all, of people living in the coastal areas are of a higher income bracket generally than the ones from the inland side. Um, Not to say there aren't people living in poverty in the counties adjacent to the coastal areas who are basically providing the workforce on the ground, literally, for that area, either in farms or in housekeeping or hotels, standing at counters. So we see this, you're already out here at 2027. That's how many years ahead of us? 2. So as this continues to rise, this is a financial disaster for these households. I think we kind of soft pedal it with, oh, their power will be turned off. Oh, we've got these programs that we can handle for them, that are going to help them pay their bills. And there's just more and more of those. And now we have 2 more, Reach and the other one, Heat, that will one time pay a bill if somebody, gets loses their power because they can't pay it. But the odds are, if they lost their power once because they can't pay it, it's going to happen again, right? And it's likely to happen even in the same year cycle. So, this is like an imminent threat. This is going on now. This is not, sort of speculative. It's going to happen to some people. It's going to happen to literally millions of people. So you talked about uh, the carbon credit that we get on our electric bills. I laughed when I saw the one that I got. There's $68 on one side, I think, for the electricity, and $46 for gas, against um, an electric bill across the year that uh, accumulates to close to $8,000. I mean, that's just, that's a joke. Come on, keep the money. Figure out, buy yourself lunch or something, because it's not going to change anything at this point. And so, I, how does, I'm totally with you on the elimination, the destruction of um, uh, investor-owned utilities. They've been a disaster for the state. They did their job. They were hired to do originally. They got electricity into all these places that it was difficult to get there. Okay, that was finished in 1950s. Okay, we made a deal back, what, 100 years ago now, almost exactly 100 years ago now, for them to do this work. It's a contract with the state. How, can you give us any insight on? They make it sound like it's hard to do, but in the end, their very survival, the basis of their being here is contractual obligations with the state. And so, is there a way to go at it in that respect, to close these contracts with them and say, yeah, thank you, you did a good job, see you later?
Um,
I know I'm being a little glib about it, but
yeah.
it's.
Let me tell you a story from here's the challenge, and I'm not going to disagree with, I was just in Altadena, on work related to our wildfire program. And on the way down the Grapevine, I was observing very old transmission infrastructure up on the mountains above Castaic and Newhall. And if you know what to look for, as people like me do, you can sort of date the decade that certain towers come from. And I'll just say there's a lot of pre-war infrastructure. Um, and it dates from the time when LA was built out as a city. Same thing is true in Northern California where I live. Um, the challenge is that we all expect to have 24/7 electric power, And people die. I mean, look no further than Texas, right, to see what happens when there are
Sure.
system blackouts. I think 230 people died during Winter Storm Uri in Texas, most of them low income. And so the challenge is managing that handoff or managing change in a context where we cannot stop. We have to keep providing the service to everyone because it really is an essential good. And I at least have not seen any kind of easy solutions to that problem. There is a bill in the legislature right now that was introduced by Senator Becker that has a bunch of ideas that will sort of put downward pressure on electric rates. But we are in, I think it's a very challenging situation. And so as I think about it, I think that some of the most hopeful things that I'm seeing are ways that give to go back to what was said earlier by Mr. Velez Olmedo, give people more control over producing their own electricity or how and when they use it. Um, there are new companies coming to market with something that's very popular in Germany, balcony solar, that would allow apartment dwellers to have access to solar power in California. It was just approved. I'm forgetting the state, but this is something that's coming to the United States. And I think it's a really interesting technology for people who don't have rooftops. In Germany, it's incredibly popular. Germany also has very high electricity costs for retail customers. Um, I think there are the long run of this issue really involves reducing fire risk, not just utility ignition, but the consequences when ignitions occur for any reason. And I would just note that's a really important affordability question, even outside of the electricity space for California. Another area where we do work is in insurance, in home insurance, and this is a major problem in the insurance sector in California it's going to really complicate housing affordability. Already is for many people, but it's going to get a lot worse. And so I think one of the solutions is community scale climate resilience, right? Building communities, helping communities to evolve in ways that create greater safety and comfort for their residents, for all residents, not just the affluent ones. Um, and through that, will eventually come greater electricity affordability. But I don't think that there is a way out of this in the short term, unfortunately. And so, I'll just say another aspect of this problem where we could see dramatic reductions in rates. One of the things that is driving this cost increase is the cost of tree trimming. About $20 on everyone's electricity bill every month is tree trimming, and that's sort of for the average bill. And the the evidence that I've seen and it's generally agreed on in the safety context is that tree trimming actually isn't super great for safety. It doesn't really change safety that much in most places. In certain places, it's very important. We're getting a much greater understanding of where that is. But so there's things like that, moving toward a more risk-based approach to what the utilities call vegetation management could save people a lot of money now, right? But there are but even that, $20 a month off the average bill is about $125 a month. That's real money in people's pockets. But it's not going to change the world. It's not going to change the world when it comes to affordability for regular Californians. So I think we need to be trying everything, and we need to be really holding the utilities to account, ideally via sort of judging their performance rather than just paying them for whatever they think they want to spend money on, right? Rewarding good performance and penalizing bad performance. That's called performance-based rate making. And I think that is a place where we should be going in California. It's not easy to do, but it can be done successfully and it can lower costs over time. But you know, we're in a tough situation.
Well, this has always been difficult. I mean, it's been difficult since it started, and for those of us who started working in this area in the late '90s, the early aughts, I mean, there's a lot of these plans that have come forward. Most of them end up being passed through CEC and dumped on CPUC and utilities to figure out how they want to do that. And so, what do we have at this point? We have actually created rate structures now for people who are generating their own electricity or who are all presumed to be wealthy or something. That is, whether you're wealthy or poor, if you have solar now, it's not making you independent. You know what I mean? The way they're building it now. I have solar because when we redesigned the house 20 years ago, when I actually could afford to do that because housing prices went up so quickly. That's how most of us got solar. It wasn't because we got richer. It was, because of that. And the state was paying for half of it at the time.
Yeah.
So, but still, I have a true up bill that sits around $2,500 a year here in Fresno, California. Now, if I was over on the coast, of course, I wouldn't have a true up at all, because the way the weather works there. But here, I mean, we're just in the high 90s and we're going to be in the high 90s again next week. So, but I just don't see how this changes as long as the companies that are running this are paying dividends to, say, stockholders. And as long as that's happening, that it's profiteering, it's going to continue. I mean, it's unless it is going to have to be draconian. The state is going to have to stand up, and I think it's going to be ugly. I think it's going to hurt. I think there's going to be times in that fight where, for a short period of time, electricity might be cut off at my house or at somebody else's house because the utilities are going to claim that you can't do this way. It's going to wobble. It's going to this. It's going to that. But we could come out the other end, with local municipals that, really do dramatically change bills and can be held accountable by local citizens. So I think without that, this is just going to keep going up. It's not going to slow down because it's going to get hotter and hotter. And I fear for myself as I get older. I fear for the folks that live in my community who I've been working with so many years. The 6,000 families that CCAC is now working with on the asthma program in their homes, all on Medi-Cal or uninsured. I fear for them because where they're going to be in 10 years, 15 years, 20 years. This is untenable the way that it continues to grow. So, and that population is continuing to grow. And it's not a migrating population from other states. It's the fact that California can't produce enough high-paying jobs to pay these kinds of utility bills. And that's just the reality of the situation. So, sorry, I completely support your approach to this, honestly. And I agree with you that approach will take years and years. If you could get done in 20 years, you'd be lucky. So, and you have to start somewhere. There's no doubt about that. But I feel that maybe we need a more radical approach to this. That's all. I'm not talking about burning down, the office up there in San Francisco for CPUC or anything. Just, the way the state approaches this, we need to push harder, and there will be some pain, but it needs to be shared around. And again, if we don't get rid of this system, I just don't see how it works in 10 years and 20 years. I just don't.
Thank you.
Done.
We'll continue the discussion.
That wasn't a question, Michael. I'm sorry. So you don't have to answer that.
Okay. Understood.
Hi, this is Dr. Catherine. I have a few clarifying questions, and then I, again, just want to encourage other committee members, if you have other comments or questions, put your hands up And otherwise, I'll also wrap up this item after my clarifying questions. So first, Michael, on the observation that you made that the electric sector has made a lot of progress in reducing their emissions, which is important to acknowledge and celebrate. I did want to clarify, my understanding is that that's largely because there is a requirement to do that through the renewable portfolio standard, which is a form of direct regulation. It's not because they're in the cap and trade program. Is that right?
Absolutely correct. And I would just add, the biggest changes to power sector emissions have come from the RPS, but also because of a law that was passed in the early 2000s that forbid long-term contracts with out-of-state coal-fired electric generators. And so as those contracts have rolled off, they have not been renewed. And that means that power sector emissions for the state have fallen dramatically. So it's both getting off of coal and building and the renewables build out. And those are not associated with cap. They are reflected in the emissions numbers, but they were not caused by cap and trade.
Right. Thank you for that. And also just to contrast that, again, when we're talking about the industrial sector where there's been very little progress under the last cap and trade extension, the ability for air districts to regulate refineries was stripped, which would have been one opportunity, right? The Bay Area Air Quality Management District was on the cusp of adopting ambitious regulations to actually address those emissions and that was essentially traded away, unfortunately. So again, just want to point out the disparity there. So then in terms of the way that the California Climate Credit works, you mentioned this, but I just want to be explicit about it. So there are public owned utilities, and that is LADWP, it's SMUD, but also for people in the San Joaquin Valley, it's like Turlock Irrigation District, and we have, little irrigation districts. So, and then there are what are called investor owned utilities or IOUs. So people who have publicly owned utilities don't get the California Climate Credit. Is that
That's
right?
correct. The POUs get allowances. So LA and SMUD in particular get free allowances, but they are not required to sell them and rebate the money to ratepayers. And so they use those allowances in different ways. My assumption would be that they use them, as they try to use them wisely, and they may use some of them to cover, allowances they would otherwise have to surrender to the Air Resources Board for compliance with cap and trade. They may also use them to, sell some of them and try to make investments with that capital, because especially the smaller communities tend to be pretty capital starved relative to the investor-owned utilities. It's harder for them to raise new capital because it's coming right out of municipal debt, so they're more sensitive. I'd also note though that SMUD and LA have much lower electricity rates than do the investor-owned utilities, and that has to do with really two things. One is that they have not been the cause of large wildfires, and the other is that they have very different rooftop solar policies. And so they have not had the same kind of what's referred to as the net metering cost shift that the investor-owned utilities have been subject to.
Thank you for that. Definitely a very nuanced conversation. So just wanted to tease that out a little bit so people can understand the implications. And, again, if we're trying to think of our own communities, who would or wouldn't be getting the credit. So then my last clarifying question, in the scenario where your team evaluated putting more credits onto low-income households' bills, does that completely remove the subsidy from coastal communities?
It removes the subsidy from non-care and FARA coastal ratepayers. We basically said, is there enough money raised for the rate raised that's currently given to the ratepayers who are in coastal communities but are not either eligible or claiming the low-income rate discount to transfer to the folks in the hot places in California that are claiming the discount. So now there is a problem there in the sense that there's a lot of people who should claim the discount who don't currently, and so they would lose the benefit. And they also there's also a problem in that, those discounts are keyed to income levels that and there's sort of a hard transition between whether you're eligible or not. And certainly people just above that income cutoff are also struggling with their electricity bills. And so this is a program that's really targeting the low income people as defined in electricity rates. Um, but it will definitely miss people who are above that income cap and still struggling, which I think there are many.
Thank you. And you just kind of alluded to this, but again, to be really clear, can you just briefly explain what CARE and FARA actually are?
Sure. Yeah. CARE and FARA are two income assistance programs that are run by all electric utilities, and CARE provides a discount that's based on the customer income. If it's below a certain level, you get a 30% discount. FARA is for families, and so it looks at household income as a criteria for discounting, and it also provides that 30% discount. And just coming back to something that was said earlier, there are these pilot programs that the PUC is experimenting with around affordability, where rather than having a discount over a number that's always increasing, right? The instead, bills are limited to a certain percentage of income. And I think I'll just say editorialize and say I think that may be the best path forward. So if you're in, that we could agree as a society on what percent of income should go toward these energy bills, and then not charge anyone more than that percentage. If it's lower, great. If it's at or above that level, the bill stays where it is. And I think moving the pilots in that direction are I think have been pretty successful. There's a question about how to pay for them, how to pay for expanding them. That could also be a place to think about utilization of cap and trade revenue.
Thank you for all of those clarifications and just underscoring that it's always a challenge where you cut off a program, because the person who's making $1 more than that cutoff obviously still could benefit from those programs. I see in the interim, before I wrap up this item, that Luis put his hand back up. Go ahead, Luis.
Thank you for allowing me to make a couple comments, and maybe it's a question. But Dr. Catherine, enforcement piece, and I want to bring it back to 617 is an indicator of when promises are made, if promises are kept. 617 is a tiny program in comparison to the larger cap and trade, and it doesn't necessarily have to just be dependent on cap and trade. It can be on the general budget. Economic designs can be created to fund it. It was intended to be a good program. And in that, there was supposed to be enforcement, and there was supposed to be regulations. Now, when you have the mindset, whoever it applies to, when you have the mindset that we can't tell the air districts what to do, then that's the point of failure right there. I mean, if the state is delegating authorities, the state has responsibilities. And I want to use that as an example. I have a friend who's, or a colleague that works environmental justice. And he's got this very well-known saying. It's like, fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. And this is an elder, went out to Vietnam, worked for government his entire career. And I trust his instincts that these very old sayings hold truth. And so the state has an opportunity to make it all right now. it can begin now with its budgets, negotiations. It can make a lot of adjustments right now. And so um, when what's really the ask, because these programs again have continued to be designed, and I can't get off my mind the fact that, as I said earlier, the area that in the region that I live, we have a slogan, it's where the sun spends the winter. But a program, if I am understanding, in its design is following sort of the heat index. But then you also have greater needs and greater equity and greater justice needs. It still doesn't seem like it goes far enough. So I'm curious to see how our comments and how we as a advisory committee can continue to help inform the direction. And so I'm confident that there's a willingness to that. But I think that we have to get a very strong signal that there is a willingness to be able to co-design something, not repeating the past, but creating something better for the future, for the now and future. Thank you.
Thank you, Martha Dina.
Okay, and maybe that I'm not sufficiently caffeinated, Michael, but we have been very opposed to cap and trade. And I think what you're saying is that there's things that we can do to mitigate some of the negative impacts on low-income communities. And because that was a lot. And so I'm trying to get, well, what are some of those things? That's one conversation. The other conversation that's beyond, it's beyond the scope of our committee, is to really deal with this issue of who owns power. Is it a basic necessity? Do we approach it in a different way? Should it, even the municipal owned still operate with this, even though they're nonprofits, they operate through a weird incentives of the market. And so how do you fix that? How do you take them out of the market? Because the market isn't magic and the market doesn't care about poor people. And I say that with, hundreds of years of evidence that it doesn't, in case somebody wants to argue with me about it. I'm trying to figure out, well, what is it that what are the tweaks that we can do that help? Since we know that, it's going to be reauthorized more than likely. And there is still a semblance of caring about justice in California, one would hope.
Well, I would just say, I think that attempting to address some of the affordability challenges, particularly, one thing just to note about this program, it was designed intentionally not to affect people's electricity consumption, right? So to actually maintain the pressure on people not to consume electricity. That's why April and October were chosen for those bill credit months. And we don't live in that world anymore. That was a decision made back in 2010, I think, maybe 11, during the original rulemakings around this policy. Electricity rates were far lower and bills were lower too, because, of all the energy efficiency things, climate was cooler. And so we really need to be thinking about helping regular people in California just afford daily life. And I guess the thing I would emphasize is just that this isn't the cap and trade reauthorization is an opportunity. Governor Newsom has reframed cap and trade in his May revise as cap and invest. And so the question is, invest in what? And I would argue that the present moment is a time to invest in the people of California and trying to make their lives, as safe and as prosperous as we can. And as we're raising money from this program, the money doesn't come from nowhere. The money that's available to spend in the GGRF principally comes from revenues that are associated with the sale of gasoline. And so taking that money and using it as effectively as possible to help people is sort of what I would personally recommend and what I would like to see the state do. It's what motivated this research on the part of our postdoc, Lane Smith. Um, of course, there are bigger questions, and there are questions that can only be answered at the PUC or, in a different, really in a different kind of context around electricity ownership and power in the state. By the way, I just put in the chat a reference to the percentage of income payment plan that I was mentioned in passing as an alternative to kind of bill discounts. Um, I guess what I would say is do not assume as you think about cap and trade that the past is going to be like the future. Cap and trade prices have been very low. Maybe I think, too low to affect the behavior of most emitters. That's clear, right? You don't need to look at those charts that uh, Dr. Catherine showed to very long to understand that. And as she correctly pointed out and corrected me on, the changes we do see don't principally come from the influence of cap and trade. However, the modelers I think we should trust on this issue are showing a preview of a future for this program where prices are a lot higher, there's more revenue, and there's also more impacts on regular people from the program. And so this is an opportunity to try to safeguard people. And that would sort of be if we think that the program will be reauthorized. If you think you're opposed to the program and you can maybe stop its reauthorization, well, that's a different conversation.
Right.
Kevin?
Well,
Oh, go ahead, Martha Dina. I'm sorry.
well, I was thinking that, well, I don't know that we can, but I think the reauthorization and getting us to where we get real emissions reductions from different sources makes a huge difference, because now the plan is, well, we're not going to get them from cap and trade, so we're going to get them through carbon capture and sequestration. So I think there's so many elements of the climate policy that aren't looking at what's the economy of the future in 10 years, 20 years, and 30 years, and how are we planning for that? Because we can't keep burning fossil fuel. It's clear why. So, yeah, I don't know. I'm stuck there. I'm sort of, it feels daunting to get the state of California to listen that there is a better way. But we keep trying anyway.
Could I make one additional point that I think is worth considering for the EJAC as they evaluate this issue? And if it's okay, just very briefly, two of the refineries in California have announced closures, idling or closure in the recent past. That's about 20% of the refining, at least our math indicates it's about 20% of the refining capacity in the state. And that's also something to be thinking about in this context. How we help, and I know, I'm certain that the Newsom administration is very focused on this issue, how we moderate any impact that might have on gasoline prices. But I think there's one of the effects of these programs is likely to be further closure of refineries. That will reduce industrial emissions, which is a good thing, but it's going to create all kinds of other effects that we need to be ready for and trying to help build a kind of reserve, a rainy day fund to help Californians. And that's another thing I think is worth thinking about and looking at. My guess is there will be at least one additional refinery closure announcement in the coming months. And I don't know that for certain, but I think it's very possible. And so this is going to start to accumulate, and in a way, this is a good thing in the sense of reducing the impacts on communities that live adjacent to the refineries. But it's also going to be a transition that might be quite challenging. And this program may create, if it's used properly, resources to help regular Californians manage through that transition in their day-to-day lives.
Great, thank you.
Kevin, you want to add something?
Yes, and I'm glad that you brought up once again this idea of the price of these carbon credits. And I remember when it was $12 or less, and it hasn't been that long ago. And the argument was going to be that, as we argued with CARB, that there need to be some kind of pricing set for these credits, a bottom, if you will. And, that this price is never going to be over that. Now, we're $40 up, right? And I agree with you. I think the sky's the limit on this. It's going to keep rising as long as the state stands behind the program. Since Maha opposes the whole cap and trade scheme, it's really hard to talk about how to fix it. But as you point out, it's what we have. And and I am a realist in the end. So the problem is that the members of the legislature and the governor will continue, as they get more money, will not move this money in the directions we're talking about. So they will continue to come up with ideas where they can focus this money at something in one of the various agencies and figure out how that actually, that particular area is actually reducing our carbon footprint. And you can see lots of really fantastical stories about that, fables, if you want to call them. And as that money is going out, and they'll just keep doing that again. So I think the EJAC's role is to continue to push back on that and to push hard that this money, as the pot grows, needs to be distributed primarily to those who need it the most before doing anything else. And that needs to be more direct. It can't come through another program at their utility that's going to take a very tiny amount of that money and drizzle it all over them once a year. That's just not going to play out. So if we really want to see this, well, at any rate, just restating what the EJAC has already stated over and over again. But thank you for the supporting data that you bring to the table. It's been incredibly useful for a lot of us.
Happy to try to be helpful.
I don't know if any of my fellow EJAC members want to comment on the price of carbon and how they see it and how they see that playing out here in California and how that money is distributed.
Thanks, Kevin. This is Dr. Catherine. I'll just jump in to say, I think to some degree, this is actually a good segue to part of how I was going to close out the item, which is one, to acknowledge and thank Carbon Markets Work Group members who met last week, both to prepare for today's presentation and discussion, but also because we believe that this is a good opportunity to amend our November 2024 resolution to potentially add some more specific language in some of these areas. And that just being one example. In full disclosure process-wise, I am out on sabbatical in June, so the proposal timeline-wise would be in July. The work group would bring back a resolution that has a markup of areas that we're looking to amend. And then in August, we would bring it forward to you all with specific edits to it for adoption. So I think that is one way for us to be able to continue a robust discussion about both necessary changes to this program, because regardless of what the governor and the legislature do, ultimately it is going to come back to the Air Resources Board. So it is still very important that we refine our positions and recommendations. And so I am going to recommend to the committee on behalf of our work group that we go ahead and revisit our resolution. Also don't want to cut off discussion if other people have comments or questions, but don't want to miss the opportunity to say thank you, Dr. Michael Wara. I think you also have a JD, if I'm correct. So maybe Michael Wara Esquire. I really appreciate that people call me Dr. Catherine, and I've been calling you Michael this whole time, which is very informal. So really want to honor and appreciate your expertise and say I hope you get well soon. Since I see no other raised hands, if there's anything that you would like to close with.
I'll just say thank you again for the opportunity to present and engage with the committee. I really appreciate it. I value this interaction so much. And if there are any other ways that I or my team can be helpful to you in developing your thinking, we are always happy to make ourselves available.
Thank you, Dr. Wara.
Yeah, thank you for that. And thank you also to committee members for engaging in a robust discussion, because the goal was to talk about the California climate credit, but also to engage with Dr. Wara on his expertise and how do we address issues of affordability and equity within the cap and trade program in California. So seeing no other hands, I think we will wrap this item and move to the next one.
Thank you. That takes us to our general public comment period. If you'd like to make a public comment and you are attending virtually, please raise your hand. Seeing no one in the room, I will look virtually. I see Jeff Ellsworth. Go ahead.
Hello, am I coming through?
You are. Thank you.
Great. Thank you for the work you're doing. My name is Jeff Ellsworth. I'm the former mayor of the small city of St. Helena in Napa County from 2018 to 2022, and now a member of California LULAC, the League of United Latin American Citizens, the largest Hispanic organization in the United States with a focus on advancing civil rights for all. I want to bring your attention to a significant concern in Upper Napa County involving Upper Valley Disposal Service and Clover Flat Landfill, a garbage and compost operation with two problematic fire and leak-prone waste sites in proximity to CAL FIRE high wildfire risk zones, and with a long history of fires, violations, and large-scale contamination incidents, including with unregulated radioactive waste. This is a situation involving significant toxic smokes, fumes, and vapors from a company operating for decades without competitive bidding or comprehensive oversight to ensure best practices related to air quality, climate impacts, or fire risk. This is a public safety and civil rights matter I'm requesting a public hearing on with sworn testimony from an appropriate board, such as this. Recent San Francisco Bay Regional Water Board investigations unfortunately did not include all relevant documentation, did not interview all key witnesses, and did not apply their own racial equity, environmental justice policies to impacts to the primarily Latino workforce of Upper Valley Disposal Service. The environmental justice and civil rights concerns in this case pertain to discriminatory practices from a company operating on exclusive government contracts towards the primarily Latino UVDS workforce, including being tasked to fight reoccurring fires with contaminated wastewater, creating toxic smokes and vapors, without adequate training or protective equipment, as well as Latino employees exposed to unregulated radioactive waste and employee death due to substandard infrastructure and other unsound workplace practices, putting the entire Napa Valley community and local environment at risk. A Cal LULAC Napa Valley Waste Workers Advocacy Committee has been formed to address the matter, and I'm attaching in what I submit a 2024 California LULAC resolution and worker support letter seeking broad coalition support. Landfills and compost facilities have significant climate impacts and are prone to fire as processing waste creates highly flammable gases like methane that can combust or act as fuel for an existing wildfire. There is no margin for the type of derelict management that has occurred at these Napa County waste sites. Dozens of fires have been reported at these sites, and in 2020, the Glass Fire wildfire burned through Clover Flat landfill before spreading across the valley. Again, I would like to request a public hearing with sworn testimony to be agendized on this matter with this board or another relevant board at the soonest possible time. Thank you. I appreciate your time.
Thank you. Continuing public comment, I see Evan Edgar. Go ahead. Evan, give us just a moment to unmute you. We cannot hear you yet.
Thank you, Evan Edgar, live from Sacramento on behalf of the California Compost Quality Council. And I spent yesterday at the Capitol on cap and trade issues. A May revise was released with $12 billion deficit. And meanwhile, I met with Jackie Irwin, who's going to be the author of the cap and trade reauthorization bill. And they did call it cap and invest, but it's just same program. It's been a program that with a floor price of carbon was at 10. It peaked out at 42 last year. Now it's down to 29 because of Trump pulled out of the Paris Accord. And plus, without certainty after 2030, the price went down, and that raises about $4 billion a year. Over the program, over the last 12.8 billion has been spent to date on this program. There's a report put out by the California Climate Investment under CARB that was May of 2025. Of that 12.8 billion, 9.2 billion have benefited communities designated as priority populations. So there's been $9.2 billion invested from this money since the beginning. Some of the programs I worked on have been edible food recovery programs. Since inception over at CalRecycle, there's been $23.3 million in edible food recovery programs that I've supported, and my company has implemented them from Fresno to Delano throughout California with a lot of big bang. It's 97% of that has benefited priority populations. Plus, we're diverting organics from landfills. There have been $190 million invested in diversion from landfills. Of that, we made renewable natural gas, which is carbon negative, and we got off diesel. So there's a huge benefit of getting off diesel to have low NOx engines with carbon negative fuel. So that's $190 million that has benefited priority populations 76% of the time. All these metrics are right out of the CARB report. And my other favorite program is Healthy Soils Program. They put $90 million into Healthy Soils Program, and that's benefited 47% of priority populations. There's been some really good programs here that people have not mentioned, overlooked, or don't want to acknowledge, but they are real, they're on the ground, I implement them, very beneficial to priority populations throughout California. The downside is the money is being swept into the general fund with a $16 billion, $12 billion deficit, and we have no money anymore for edible food recovery. For the last 2 years, $0 for edible food recovery, and none next year. So there's some of these great programs that I've worked on are no longer being funded as the price of carbon goes down, as the deficit gets bigger, and the money is being swept away. So if anything, I want to put a plug in to continue these programs on healthy soils, to get off pesticides and fertilizers, and get off landfills and diesel, and let's feed hungry people. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Continuing public comment, looking to the room, seeing no one in the room to make public comment, looking virtually. I'll give you a moment to raise your hand. If you'd like to make public comment and you're attending virtually, please raise your hand. Noting for the record, we have roughly 53 virtual attendees. Seeing no hands raised at this time, that concludes our general public comment period. I will turn it over to CARB to provide announcements.
All right. Hi, everyone. My name is Cristobal Kamadu. I am the Equity Analyst in the Office of Environmental Justice, Tribal Affairs, and Border Relations, also known as OEJTB. With Radhika, the branch chief of the Environmental Justice and Equity branch, out on vacation, I will provide some important announcements for CARB events coming up in the next month. I'll be highlighting a few events for you in the meeting today, but we'll also send the table via email as well. CARB released its research solicitation on April 1st with proposals that were due by May 2nd. All pre-proposal submitters will be notified of the status of their submission by May 23rd. There is a virtual community meeting for clean transportation incentives for a cleaner California on May 20th from 5 to 7 p.m. There is also a virtual public workshop for Senate Bill 375, regional target updates on May 21st from 4 to 5:30 p.m. And on May 22nd from 9 to 12 p.m. in Sacramento, there will be a cardboard meeting where there will be an informal update informational on natural and working lands and nature-based strategies. We also have a methane task force public meeting on May 27th from 5:30 to 6:30 p.m. CARB is also hosting community meetings on hydrogen and the report on hydrogen production and development required by SB 1075 on May 27th in Oakland from 5:45 p.m. to 7:15 p.m. and May 28th virtually from 6:30 p.m. to 8 p.m. There will be a virtual public workshop series to commence discussion on California's corporate greenhouse gas reporting and climate-related financial risk disclosure programs, which will be on May 29th from 9:30 a.m. to 12:30 p.m. And for those that are interested in the funding plan for clean transportation incentives, note that there are 3 upcoming events on May 30th from 1 to 3 p.m., June 17 from 1 to 3:30 p.m., and June 20th from 9 a.m. to 12 p.m. I will now turn it over to Jane. Thank you.
Thank you. At this point, we will take our last agenda item, which is next steps and closing remarks. I will start with the co-chairs for closing remarks.
This is Dr. Catherine. Thank you again, everyone, for your attendance and participation. I think our work is as important now as ever. I will reiterate my commitment to work with the Carbon Markets Work Group to bring back the cap and trade resolution in July, and I will be out on sabbatical until then, so I will see you all in July. Over to you, Martha Dina.
Thank you. And I am happy to be working. I'll continue working with the BEEP coalition and members of the committee to get the Bill and Decarbonization resolution put together by our next meeting. And I do want to address Jeff from LULAC, and LULAC has a special place in my heart. Known them for a long time. If you can reach out to me, I don't know that this is the body. I just don't want to ignore what you said because I think it's incredibly important. We're also dealing with a community that has a fire that they believe is going to burn for years in a landfill, and we're finding so few answers and very few agencies that are willing to say they're responsible or accountable. And so I'd be happy. Please reach out to me. You can find my information from our website with Physicians for Social Responsibility LA. But and we can figure out who should be listening. But I don't know that it's the EJAC. But I don't want to leave you hanging, and we can try to support you and maybe LA and Napa can do something together because we're dealing with something very similar. And I will see you all at the next meeting.
Thank you. All right. Any final next steps or? All right. Our next meeting is June 12th here in Sacramento and also virtually. You can find information posted on the CARB and EJAC website. At this time, that concludes our meeting. The time is now 4:14 p.m. Thank you.
Thank you.
Gracias. Adiós.
Thank you.